Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet as Emma, Jake, Mia, Ben, Olivia, and Sam pulled into the gravel driveway of the old cabin. It was nestled at the edge of a dense forest, surrounded by tall, swaying trees and a quiet that felt almost unnatural. The fall air was crisp, and the scent of damp earth clung to the breeze. Emma jumped out of the car first, stretching her arms wide. "This place is perfect," she said with a grin, spinning around in the fading light. "I knew this trip was going to be awesome." Jake, still in the driver's seat, glanced skeptically at the woods. "It's kind of isolated, though, isn't it? Feels like the kind of place where you'd find a couple of murderers lurking behind trees." Ben, who had already started unloading the car, laughed. "Relax, man. It's just a weekend in the woods. What's the worst that could happen?" "Yeah, I think Jake's just scared of the woods," Mia teased, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "It's not like we're staying in a haunted mansion or anything." Olivia, the quietest of the group, peered nervously into the thickening shadows of the forest, but said nothing. She always had a sixth sense about things, an uneasy feeling she couldn't quite shake. Emma, oblivious to the tension, took a deep breath. "Honestly, I could use a break from everything. Just being here feels peaceful." Sam, the last to step out of the car, smiled faintly. "I agree. No phones, no distractions. Just us and the forest." The cabin was small but cozy, with a weathered stone chimney and windows that overlooked the vast, silent woods. The front porch creaked as the group filed inside, their laughter and banter filling the air. But there was something strange about the place, something that made the hairs on the back of Olivia's neck stand up. The stillness outside was one thing, but the cabin itself felt off. As they unpacked their things, Olivia noticed a large, faded map tacked to the wall near the fireplace. The edges were worn, the ink smudged from years of exposure. It depicted the surrounding woods in intricate detail, paths, streams, landmarks. But what caught her eye was a section that seemed deliberately marked out in red. It was a part of the forest deep within the map's borders, labeled only with the words "Harvest Hollow, stay away." She furrowed her brow, tracing the words with her finger. But before she could give it more thought, Mia called out from the kitchen. "Hey, look what I found!" She held up an old journal, its pages yellowed with age. "It's a collection of local stories and myths. Bet there are some good ones in here." The others crowded around as Mia flipped through the pages, her voice rising with excitement. "Well, listen to this one. It's about the harvest moon. When the moon is full and the air grows cold, the harvest must be reaped. Beware the woods on nights like this, for the forest craves what it is owed." Jake snorted. "Sounds like a creepy campfire story to me." Mia grinned. "Exactly. That's the best part. Check out this one. On the night of the harvest moon, the shadows walk. They look like people, but they aren't. They hunt those who dare to trespass. Only the pure can escape." Ben chuckled, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "You guys are all way too into this. It's just some spooky old stories. Nothing to worry about." But Olivia, still staring at the map, felt a chill creep down her spine. There was something about the way the words on the journal seemed to linger in the air, their meaning heavy. The forest craves what it is owed. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a mistake coming here, that they had unknowingly crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Still, she said nothing. It was just nerves, right? They spent the rest of the evening around the fire, joking, laughing, and telling more stories as the full moon slowly rose above the tree-line. The harvest moon, golden and enormous, hung in the sky like a lantern, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the ground. The forest outside stood still, holding its breath. Later, after the fire had died down and the group was settling in for the night, Emma stood at the edge of the porch, gazing up at the moon. "I've always loved the harvest moon," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's the one time of year when everything feels magical, like the world is holding a secret." Jake, lying back on the porch swing, rolled his eyes. "Well, I don't know about magical, but it does make the whole place look a little spooky." "Maybe," Emma said with a playful grin, "but don't worry. If anything weird happens, I'm sure Mia will just tell us another ghost story to distract us." Mia laughed. "Hey, don't blame me if things get creepy." They all settled in for the night, but as Olivia lay in bed, the weight of the silence in the forest pressed against her. The house was warm, the bed soft, but the air outside was thick with something else, something ancient waiting. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the trees made her heart race a little faster. She couldn't shake the sense that the stories Mia had read aloud weren't just stories. The woods were watching them, and the harvest moon wasn't done yet. The night was still, save for the soft murmur of the wind stirring the branches outside. The world beyond the cabin felt distant, almost forgotten as Olivia tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The sounds of the forest were strangely muted, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Every rustle, every groan of the old would seem to come from deeper within the forest. But when she peered through the window, nothing was there. "It's just the wind," she told herself. But the discomfort wouldn't leave. A sound broke the silence. At first, it was faint, a whisper, almost like a call, floating through the night air. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. "It's nothing," she thought. "It's just the wind playing tricks on me." But then it came again, louder, clearer. "Olivia. Olivia." She sat up, her heart hammering in her chest. The sound seemed to be coming from just outside the window. She crept to the edge of the bed and peered out into the moonlit forest, her breath fogging up the glass. At first, she saw nothing. The trees stood still, bathed in the eerie light of the harvest moon, casting long, twisting shadows across the ground. But then, just at the edge of her vision, she saw something. A figure. At least she thought it was a figure. It was tall and cloaked in shadow, standing just beyond the tree line, motionless. Its form was indistinct, flickering like a flame on the verge of going out. Olivia's pulse quickened, and her hand trembled on the windowsill. She blinked, and it was gone. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she backed away from the window, the sudden, overwhelming sense that she wasn't alone filling her chest. There was something out there, watching her, waiting for her to do something. Her eyes flicked to the door, and the old, weathered map from earlier flashed in her mind. Harvest Hollow. Stay away. Shaking, Olivia turned and rushed down the hall to the others' rooms. She hesitated only a moment before knocking on Emma's door. "Emma," she whispered urgently. "Emma, wake up." Emma stirred, groggy but alert, pulling herself up to a sitting position. "Olivia, what's wrong?" "I saw something," Olivia said, her voice quivering. "In the woods, a figure. I don't know what it was, but it was watching me. I think it's real." Emma looked at her, a mix of concern and confusion on her face. "A figure? Are you sure you weren't dreaming or imagining it? It's probably just some shadows. You know how the forest looks at night." Olivia shook her head. "No, Emma, this wasn't just shadows. I saw it. I swear I did." Emma hesitated, rubbing her eyes. All right. Let me grab my jacket. I'll come with you." The two of them slipped quietly out into the cool night air. The moon was hanging even higher now, casting its sickly golden glow over the landscape. The forest looked different, darker, more oppressive, as if the trees themselves had grown larger and more imposing. "Where did you see it?" Emma asked, glancing nervously at the woods. Olivia pointed toward the edge of the forest, her heart still pounding. "Over there, right at the tree line. It wasn't like a person, though. It was Wrong. They stood together in silence for a moment, staring into the darkness, but nothing moved. The forest was unnervingly still. "You're probably just spooked by the moonlight," Emma said, trying to sound reassuring. "Let's go back inside. It's late, and we're just a little on edge." Olivia nodded reluctantly, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something that was very much alive and aware of them. They turned and made their way back toward the cabin, but as they did, Olivia felt a chill run through her, not from the cold air, but from something deeper, an instinct that told her they weren't alone. When they stepped back inside, the warmth of the cabin didn't seem to ease her tension. The others were still asleep, unaware of what had just transpired. Olivia felt as though they were all being drawn into something they couldn't control. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if the entire night was wrapped in a kind of unnatural, waiting silence. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky had taken on the same oppressive weight as the forest. The air was thick with fog, and the cabin felt colder than it should have been. Everyone was up now, moving slowly through the motions of morning, though a heavy atmosphere hung over them. "Good sleep?" Jake asked with a half smile, though his eyes looked a little too wide, like he hadn't rested well either. His words were casual, but there was an edge to his voice. Olivia didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the window, but the figure in the forest was gone. Only the swirling fog remained, making the trees appear like dark, looming giants. "It's just my imagination," she told herself, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. Ben was the first to break the tension. "Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm starving. Let's get some breakfast and maybe hit the woods later. Get some hiking in before the weather gets worse." Mia, always the enthusiastic one, nodded eagerly. "I say we explore a bit, see what we can find. I mean, we're out here in the middle of nowhere, might as well make the most of it." But Olivia wasn't so sure. Every instinct in her screamed that the forest wasn't just an ordinary forest. It was something else entirely, something ancient. And it didn't want them there. She looked at the others. They were already planning their day, oblivious to the ominous presence that hung in the air. They don't know. They don't see it. But she did, and the more she tried to ignore it, the more she realized that the harvest moon wasn't just a pretty sight in the sky. It was a warning. The day passed in uneasy silence. The fog persisted, clinging to the earth like a heavy shroud, and the air felt thick with an oppressive weight that made every sound, every step, seem louder than it should have been. Even the usual carefree chatter that filled their mornings seemed muted, as though the forest was sucking the energy out of them, one word at a time. After breakfast, they decided to hike deeper into the woods, hoping that the fresh air and exercise would shake off the heavy feeling that lingered. But Olivia couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that crept through her with every step they took. The others seemed distracted, their laughter and conversations ebbing and flowing like the breeze. But Olivia couldn't help but feel that the woods were watching them. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig underfoot seemed to echo with purpose. As they moved deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, the path less clear. The sun was completely obscured by the heavy canopy overhead, casting everything into a dim twilight. It felt like they had crossed some invisible threshold, and now the world was holding its breath. "Hey, check this out," Ben called, breaking the silence. He had veered off the trail to explore a small clearing ahead, and now he was crouched down next to something partially buried in the ground. The others walked over to join him. "What is it?" Jake asked, stepping carefully around the damp earth. Ben dug a little more, pulling out a twisted, gnarled branch, but it wasn't a branch at all. It was a human bone, worn and yellowed with age. It was unmistakably a femur, long and jagged, as though it had been lying there for years. Mia recoiled. "What the hell is that?" Olivia felt her stomach turn. That's not from an animal," she murmured, her voice tight. "What is it doing here?" Ben tossed the bone aside, unfazed. "Probably just some old remains. Could be an animal. Maybe a hunter left it behind. Or maybe something worse, Olivia whispered, but her words were lost in the growing tension among the group. Emma looked around, her face pale. Let's just head back to the cabin. We've seen enough for today. But the unease didn't leave her voice. There was something in the air, something ancient, something tied to the land, and Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was trying to tell them something. They began making their way back to the path. But as they walked, the trees seemed to press in closer, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers. The once familiar trail now felt alien, and each step became harder, as though the forest was pushing them in a direction they didn't want to go. The air grew heavier with every breath, and the sense of being followed intensified. It's the harvest moon, Olivia thought. It's waking up. Does anyone else feel like the trees are? Moving? Mia asked, her voice nervous. Moving, Jake asked, frowning. What are you talking about? I don't know, Mia said, looking over her shoulder, her eyes wide with discomfort. Like they're watching us or something. I swear, they're getting closer. Okay, that's enough, Ben said, his voice sharp. Let's just get back to the cabin. Now! They quickened their pace, but the sense of being trapped in the forest didn't lift. Olivia's heart was racing now, the distant whispers from last night starting to echo again in her mind. She glanced around, her eyes darting between the trees, the dark shadows creeping just beyond her vision. Suddenly, Sam stopped, his face going ashen. Look! He pointed ahead, his voice barely above a whisper. At the far end of the trail, just past a cluster of trees, stood the old barn. It was the same barn they had seen the day before, the one that had been hidden behind the overgrowth, seemingly abandoned. But now, as they stared at it, it seemed impossibly closer, as though it had shifted in the night. The fog clung to its rotting walls, and the dilapidated roof sagged like a thing dying. We were just here, Olivia muttered, her eyes narrowing. That's not possible. Let's not go near it, Emma said, but her voice trembled. We need to keep moving. This place feels wrong. But before they could turn away, a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground. Olivia froze, her feet rooted to the earth. It came from the barn low, rhythmic like chanting. Her heart pounded in her chest as the sound wrapped around her, pulling her toward it. Did you hear that? Olivia whispered. The others nodded slowly, their eyes wide. But no one spoke. Let's just check it out, Ben said, his voice oddly calm, though his hand trembled at his side. Maybe there's an explanation. A couple of animals or something. Ben, I'm serious, Mia said, grabbing his arm. We need to get out of here. Now! But Ben shook her off, his curiosity piqued. I'll be quick. Stay here if you want. Without waiting for a response, he started walking toward the barn. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, and each one seemed to draw him deeper into the fog. No, Ben, wait, Emma called out, but her voice was swallowed by the dense air. Olivia could only watch, helpless, as Ben approached the barn. His form disappeared into the shadows, and for a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the hum stopped. There was a moment of eerie silence, followed by a sudden crash, a loud, guttural sound, like something heavy being thrown to the ground. Ben! Emma's voice cracked as she took a step forward. Ben, are you okay? No answer. Before anyone could react, the barn door creaked open. Slowly, painfully slow, the rotten wood dragged across the dirt floor. And in the doorway stood something, someone, though it wasn't Ben anymore. A shadow, tall and thin, with hollow, sunken eyes, its skin pale as bone, and its mouth twisted into an inhuman grin. It was Ben, or what was left of him. The figure raised its hand, pointing directly at Olivia. The harvest has begun, and then the figure vanished. The air was thick with panic. Emma screamed, her voice high-pitched and strained. Ben, she cried out, rushing toward the barn, but Olivia grabbed her arm, holding her back. Don't go. Olivia's voice was a desperate whisper, her chest tightening as she tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Ben was gone, but that thing in the doorway, it wasn't human. It wasn't anything they had ever seen before. That wasn't Ben, Olivia said, her voice shaking. That thing, it wasn't him. Emma tore herself free from Olivia's grip, her eyes wide with terror. Then what was it? Her voice cracked, raw with fear. The others were frozen, staring at the barn, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Sam, his face pale, looked like he might collapse at any moment. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice barely more than a hoarse whisper. Mia looked between them, her eyes wild, like a trapped animal. "We can't just leave him. Ben's still out there." "We don't know what that thing is," Olivia snapped, her heart racing as she struggled to keep her voice steady. "If Ben is out there, it's not him. We're not going in there. We need to leave. Now!" The others hesitated, fear warring with the instinct to find their friend, but the terror on Olivia's face seemed to sway them. Slowly, they began backing away from the barn, their eyes darting toward the path that led back to the cabin. "We can't just leave him," Emma whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I don't think he's out there anymore," Olivia said quietly, trying to meet Emma's eyes. "Whatever that thing was, it's taken him, and now it's coming for us." The sound of the barn door creaking shut echoed through the stillness of the forest, a hollow, ominous noise that sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. The silence that followed was suffocating, oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for them to make a move. "Let's go," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "We need to get back to the cabin. We'll figure it out there. Maybe we can..." But then the trees shifted. The wind stirred, not with the usual whisper of the forest, but with a deep, unnatural groan. The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, and the shadow of the trees stretched unnaturally long, as though they were closing in on them. Olivia felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise as the air grew heavier, denser. The forest seemed to be alive, watching them, urging them forward. "Move!" Olivia shouted, the panic rising in her chest again. They didn't need any more convincing. They turned and began to run, feet pounding the ground, hearts racing. The path back to the cabin, once so familiar, now felt like a maze of twisting roots and encroaching branches, the forest itself seeming to shift and change with every step. The fog wrapped around them, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Behind them, they heard something else. A low, guttural sound, almost like a whisper, but not quite. It was more of a growl, like something that had no business being part of this world. The sound of it was enough to make Olivia's blood run cold. "Run!" Mia screamed, her voice filled with terror. "It's following us." The sound grew louder, closer. It was unmistakable now, a heavy footfall, dragging itself through the underbrush, slow but inevitable. Suddenly, Olivia tripped, her foot catching on a hidden root. She hit the ground hard, her breath knocked out of her. Her hands scraped against the dirt as she tried to push herself up, but before she could make it to her feet, a shadow loomed above her. A figure, tall and twisted, its eyes hollow and empty, its smile wide and wrong. It was standing over her. "Olivia!" Emma's voice sliced through the air, but the figure didn't look at her. It was focused entirely on Olivia, its hollow gaze sending a wave of cold terror through her chest. Olivia scrambled backward, her heart pounding in her ears. The figure leaned down, its face twisting into something almost familiar, but then it wasn't. It was a shadow, a distorted reflection of Ben, only far worse, far more sinister. "Olivia." The figure rasped, its voice like dead leaves rustling in the wind, the words barely comprehensible. "The harvest must begin." And then, without warning, the thing lunged. Olivia screamed, her arms flailing as she tried to defend herself, but before she could even react, something flashed, a blur of motion. It was Mia, her face wild, holding a thick branch like a weapon, swinging it toward the creature. The branch struck the figure in the chest with a sickening thud, knocking it back. For a moment, everything went still. The figure staggered, its form flickering like a fading flame. Its hollow eyes fixed on Mia, and for the briefest moment, Olivia could see the malicious intent in its gaze. But before it could strike, Emma shouted again. "Run now!" They didn't wait. They all bolted, Mia taking the lead as she cleared the way with the branch, pushing through the underbrush with all her strength. The others followed, their feet pounding the ground, the sound of the creature's pursuit growing louder, faster, closer. They broke into the clearing just beyond the trees, the cabin, and the sight of it filled them with a temporary relief, though the fear hadn't left. They could see the door slightly ajar, as though waiting for them to return. But as they reached the door, the ground shook. The air went cold again. The harvest moon hung heavy in the sky, casting an eerie light over the forest, and in the distance a sound rose, almost like a chant, low and growling, building in intensity. "The harvest," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not just Ben, it's everything. The forest is waking up." The others were too terrified to speak, their faces pale with fear. The forest was alive, and it had begun to collect its due. The cabin door slammed shut behind them with a finality that sent a chill down Olivia's spine. She turned quickly to make sure it was locked, the old wood creaking as if it too were holding its breath. But it didn't feel safe. Not anymore. The air inside was thick with tension, the shadows seeming to loom larger with every passing second. "We need to get out of here," Mia gasped, her eyes wide and panicked as she backed away from the door. "We can't stay here. That thing, it's coming. It's hunting us." Olivia nodded, but her mind was racing. She had to focus. She had to figure out what was going on. What the hell is happening? She turned toward Emma, who was staring at the window, her face pale. "Emma, what do you see?" Olivia asked, her voice tight. Emma slowly turned toward her. "The trees," she said in a shaky voice. "They're moving. I swear I saw them. Shifting. It's like they're..." Bending toward the cabin. Olivia followed her gaze, her stomach twisting. The fog had thickened outside, rolling across the land like a living thing, and the trees, twisted and gnarled, did look like they were leaning closer, their branches almost reaching toward the cabin. Then, another sound reached their ears, a low, haunting hum. It wasn't from the forest anymore. It was coming from inside the cabin. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered, his voice strained with fear. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. The hum, it sounded like chanting. It was faint at first, like the buzz of an insect too distant to notice, but now it was unmistakable. Growing louder, closer. "Where's Ben?" Sam asked suddenly, his eyes wide, frantic. "What happened to him? We need to find him." Olivia felt the panic clawing at her throat, but she swallowed it down. "Ben's gone," she said softly, though her voice faltered. "Whatever that thing was, it took him. But we can't save him now. We need to focus on surviving." "No," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. "We can't just leave him. We need to..." "Emma," Olivia cut her off, her voice firm, but with an edge of desperation. "We don't have a choice. Whatever that was, it's not Ben, and it's coming for us next." The humming grew louder still, vibrating through the walls like an impending storm. Olivia's eyes darted to the window again. The trees outside were closer now, their twisted branches scraping against the glass. Something wasn't right. The air felt alive, charged with energy, like the whole forest was waiting for something. Watching them, Olivia rushed to the corner of the cabin where the old maps and books lay scattered. She had to figure out what was happening. Something had brought them here. Something about this place. The Harvest Hollow. She grabbed one of the thick old books, flipping through it frantically, her hands trembling with fear. Her fingers froze as she came across a faded page covered in dark ink, describing something ancient. "The harvest is not a season," the text read. "It is a pact, a curse, bound by blood and soil. When the harvest moon rises, the land demands its due. The forest calls, and it is not forgotten. Olivia's breath hitched as she read the next line. The lost must return. The living must serve. When the moon is full, the harvest will come, and the souls of the unwilling will be consumed. A chill ran down her spine. She looked up at the others, her eyes wide with realization. This place, it's cursed. It's not just a legend. The forest, it has a will of its own. And tonight, it's waking up. The thing we saw, it's part of it. And the rest of us, we're next. That's why it's hunting us, Emma whispered, her face pale. Because we came here. We weren't supposed to. Olivia nodded grimly. We're trapped. The forest is alive. And it's not going to let us leave. Suddenly, the humming stopped. For a moment, everything was still. And then, the windows exploded in a shower of glass. Olivia screamed as the force of the blast threw her backward, the sound of cracking wood and glass ringing in her ears. She shielded her face with her arms, feeling the sharp sting of shards cut into her skin. The others were thrown to the floor, the force of the explosion sending them sprawling across the cabin. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold, and the door that they had so carefully closed and locked opened wide with a groan. A dark shadow filled the doorway, taller than any human, its form flickering like smoke, its face a twisted blur of features. Olivia could barely breathe, her chest tight with fear. Whatever it wasn't human. It was something ancient, something hungry. It stepped inside, its movements slow, deliberate. The walls began to shake. The floor groaned beneath their feet. Then, the voice came, a voice not from the figure in the doorway, but from deep within the earth itself. The harvest is upon you. And with those words, the ground shook violently. Roots erupted from the floor, twisting and curling like serpents, wrapping around the legs of the group, pulling them toward the center of the room. Olivia screamed, trying to break free, but the roots only tightened, their grip strong and unrelenting. "Help! Help!" Emma cried, but her voice was muffled by the rumble of the earth, the power of the curse deepening with every passing second. Olivia's vision blurred as she was pulled toward the center of the cabin, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The chanting was back, louder than ever, resonating from the earth, the trees, and the air around them. The very world felt alive, as though it was closing in on them. And then she understood. The land wasn't just calling. It was feeding. They were the harvest. The roots tightened around Olivia's legs, their grip cold and unyielding, pulling her down toward the center of the cabin where the floor had begun to crack open. The walls trembled, groaning as though the entire structure was about to collapse. She struggled, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but the more she fought, the stronger the roots became, dragging her closer to the earth below. "Help!" Mia screamed, thrashing beside her, but the roots were pulling her too. Her arms flailed in the air as she tried to free herself, but they were no match for the ancient strength of the forest. The shadow in the doorway loomed larger, its form flickering in and out of focus, like smoke swirling in the moonlight. Its face, when it appeared, was a grotesque mask of twisted features, eyes hollow and black, its mouth stretched wide in a gaping, unnatural grin. It wasn't alive. It wasn't dead. It was something in between, something far worse. The harvest is complete. It rasped in a voice that seemed to echo from every corner of the earth, each word drenched in darkness. The land claims what is due. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, each beat like the drum of some ancient ritual. The roots pulled harder, and she could feel the ground shifting beneath her, as though the earth itself was hungry, eager to swallow them whole. "Not yet," Olivia shouted, her voice desperate as she reached for the nearest object, a broken chair leg that had been torn loose during the explosion. She gripped it tightly, her fingers numb with fear, and swung it at the roots nearest to her. The wood splintered, but it did little to break the hold. The earth trembled again, and then something shifted beneath the cabin. The floor buckled, and the walls seemed to breathe, rising and falling as though the cabin itself was alive, part of the forest's ancient hunger. "Where's Ben?" Emma cried again, her voice raw with terror. "Where's Ben? We have to..." But Olivia didn't have the heart to answer. She didn't know where Ben was anymore. The thing they had seen, the thing that looked like Ben, hadn't been him. It had been part of the forest's twisted will. And now, they were all becoming part of it. "Ben's gone," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "We need to survive. We need to get out of here." The shadow in the doorway let out a low, almost musical laugh, a sound that made Olivia's skin crawl. "There is no escape." The voice was mocking, as if it had known all along that they couldn't outrun it. "The harvest must be fulfilled. The unwilling will return to the earth, and you will serve as the roots of its power." Olivia's eyes darted around the room. She had to think. They couldn't stay here. The earth was closing in on them, but there had to be a way out. "Look!" Sam shouted, pointing toward the back of the cabin. "The back window. It's open." The back window was just within reach. Olivia didn't waste a second. With every ounce of strength she had left, she swung the chair leg again, hitting the roots that bound her. They loosened for just a moment, long enough for her to scramble toward the window. The others followed her lead, struggling and fighting against the roots as they pulled at the floorboards, tugging at the very fabric of the cabin. The ground beneath them was shaking violently now, like a beast stirring beneath the earth. "Go!" Olivia shouted. "Now!" She lunged toward the window, her heart in her throat, the others right behind her. The roots were relentless, snapping and curling around their ankles, pulling them back toward the dark, gaping hole in the floor. With a final, desperate heave, Olivia pushed through the window and into the cold night air. The others followed, one by one, crawling through the narrow opening into the safety of the woods. But the moment they were outside, they felt the weight of the land's presence pressing in on them. It was everywhere, in the trees, in the earth beneath their feet, in the air they breathed. The fog was thick again, swirling around them like an otherworldly mist, but they had no time to think. They ran, their feet pounding against the damp ground, hearts racing. Behind them, the cabin continued to tremble, its walls cracking and groaning as though it was being pulled apart from within. But the forest wasn't done with them. The hum was back, louder than ever. The low, guttural sound filled the air, growing deeper, more insistent with each passing moment. And then they heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, steady, following them. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The thing from the barn was out there, and it was hunting them. "Keep moving," she shouted, but her legs felt like lead, the weight of fear dragging her down. The others were right behind her, but they were all starting to slow. They had been running for what felt like hours, the fog growing thicker, the trees pressing in closer with every step. The trail they had once followed was gone, swallowed by the forest. Then they reached a clearing. In the center of it stood the barn. The same barn, but now it was different. It was alive, its walls shifting, its roof sagging like it was breathing. The windows were dark, but Olivia could feel something inside, something watching them. "No," she whispered. "No, not the barn. It's not safe." But it was too late. The figure from before, Ben, or what had been Ben, appeared in the doorway, standing tall and unnatural. Its eyes were black pits of nothingness, its skin pale and stretched, its smile wide and wrong. "Come to me," it whispered, the voice both distant and immediate, as though it was all around them. "The harvest will not be denied. You are part of the land now. Come, return to the earth." Olivia's chest constricted. The thing was right. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't hide. The forest had already claimed them. With a final, desperate scream, Olivia ran toward the barn, knowing that there was no escape. They were trapped, surrounded by the will of the land, and the harvest was only just beginning. Olivia's legs felt like lead as she stumbled forward, the ground beneath her shifting like something alive, the fog swirling around her in an ever-tightening grip. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the cold night air filling her lungs and sending a chill through her entire body. The barn loomed before them, dark and twisted, a nightmarish reflection of what it had once been. She could hear the others behind her, their footsteps heavy and uneven, but they were all slowing. It was like the forest was draining them, sapping their strength with each passing step. The forest wasn't just alive, it was hunting them. And in the center of it all stood the figure. The thing that had once been Ben. Its eyes were black voids, hollow and endless. Its smile was too wide, too wrong. As it took a step toward them, the ground seemed to ripple beneath its feet, as though the earth itself was responding to its presence. "Ben!" Emma called out, her voice shaking, her face pale with fear. "Ben, is that really you?" The thing didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head, like it was studying them, its smile only growing wider. It was not Ben. It was a distortion, a shadow of something that had once been human, but now it was something else entirely. Something born of the forest's dark hunger. Olivia swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the others. She could feel the pull of the forest all around them, a slow, suffocating pressure closing in. They couldn't just stand here. They had to do something. "We can't let it take us," Olivia said, her voice low but firm. "We need to fight back. We need to destroy it." Mia stepped forward, her face a mixture of fear and determination. She had always been the one to act when things went wrong, the one who never hesitated. But this was different. This wasn't just any fight. This was something ancient, something beyond their understanding. "How?" Mia asked, her voice tight. "What are we supposed to do against that?" Before Olivia could answer, the figure, Ben, took another step forward, and the ground trembled beneath them. The air thickened, the fog swirling into tendrils that seemed to reach out and touch their skin, cold as death. "You are mine," the thing said in a voice that was not Ben's, but something deeper, something older. "The forest calls. The harvest is near. You will serve as the roots of its power." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, her mind racing for a plan. The words were clear now. They weren't just being hunted. They were being claimed. And once the forest had claimed them, there would be no escape. The thing smiled again, its grin stretching even wider, its eyes flickering like the dark void of space. Olivia could feel the pressure in the air growing, the darkness pressing against them, suffocating, pulling at their limbs. "Move!" Olivia shouted suddenly, her heart hammering in her chest. She grabbed Mia's arm and yanked her back toward the forest. "We need to run, get to the trees, get away from it." But as they turned to flee, the earth beneath them shifted. The ground cracked open, and roots, massive, gnarled roots, burst forth from the earth, snaring their ankles and dragging them toward the dark pit in the center of the clearing. "No!" Sam screamed, trying to break free, but it was no use. The roots were too strong, too relentless. They pulled him down, into the very earth beneath them, his screams fading as he was swallowed whole. Olivia's heart dropped into her stomach, her mind racing. They couldn't outrun this. They couldn't fight it. "We need to destroy the heart of it," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her realization. "The barn. We have to destroy the heart of the forest's power." The others looked at her, their eyes wide with disbelief and fear, but Olivia wasn't giving up. She could feel it, the source of the curse, the thing that had bound them to this place. And it was in the barn. It had always been in the barn. Without waiting for another moment, Olivia sprinted toward the barn, her feet pounding against the earth, the others following close behind. The fog thickened, wrapping around them like a suffocating shroud, but they pushed through, driven by desperation. The barn door stood open, as if inviting them inside, but Olivia didn't hesitate. She was done running. They had to end it, or they would be lost forever. Inside, the air was thick with darkness. The smell of rot and decay filled her nostrils, and the floor beneath her feet creaked with every step. The barn had changed, its wooden beams twisted and distorted, the walls covered in a thick, dark moss that seemed to pulse with life. In the center of the barn stood a massive, gnarled tree, a tree that seemed to be growing out of the very floorboards, its roots winding through the walls and stretching deep into the earth below. Its branches were thick with dark, twisted vines, and at the base of the tree lay someone. It was Ben, but he wasn't Ben anymore. His body was pale and lifeless, his skin cracked and peeling, but his eyes were open, black as the void, and staring directly at Olivia. "You're too late," the thing whispered, its voice hollow and cracked, coming from Ben's mouth but not him. "The harvest is complete. The forest will take its due." The roots were everywhere now. Thick and twisted, they snaked across the floor, around their legs, pulling them toward the center. Olivia struggled to break free, but the roots held firm. "The land calls for you," the thing continued, "and you will serve. All who walk upon the earth shall return to the soil. Your blood, your bones, your soul. They will nourish the roots." Olivia's heart raced. She couldn't let this happen. She wouldn't let the forest claim them all. "Help me," she screamed, her voice ragged with fear and desperation. Mia was the first to react. She grabbed a broken shard of wood from the floor and shoved it into the heart of the gnarled tree, piercing the bark with all her strength. The tree screamed, a horrible, high-pitched wail that echoed through the barn, shaking the walls. But it wasn't enough. The roots tightened, pulling them closer, dragging them toward the center of the barn, toward the tree's heart. The ground beneath them trembled again, and Olivia realized the forest wasn't just trying to claim them, it was sacrificing them. And then, from the darkness, the figure of Ben, or whatever it was now, stepped forward. Its grin was wide, its eyes black as night. "You will return to the earth," it whispered, its voice low and twisted. "You are the harvest." The barn seemed to grow darker with every passing moment, its walls now closing in, the roots of the ancient tree thickening around Olivia's legs, winding tighter and tighter. Every pull of the earth beneath her felt like it was dragging her down into some cold, dark abyss. She could hear the others gasping for breath, their cries of fear filling the air, but their voices were becoming distant, drowned out by the horrific, haunting wail of the tree that seemed to resonate deep within her bones. Mia was still clutching the shard of wood, her hands bloodied as she struggled to push it deeper into the trunk of the tree. But the bark was slick and dark, the wood itself almost alive, pushing back with a strength that seemed unnatural. Each time Mia shoved it deeper, the trees seemed to pulse in response, the roots around them tightening with more force. Olivia fought against the pull, her mind racing. There has to be a way. We can't just let it take us. We can't let it finish its harvest. But the thing that had once been Ben, if it could even still be called Ben, stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. The forest was doing the work. The roots, the vines, the earth itself. They were part of it. The harvest had begun, and Olivia and her friends were its final offering. "You cannot escape," the voice rasped again, hollow and mocking. The thing's black eyes flickered, its mouth stretching into that unnatural, grotesque grin. "The harvest is all. The roots will claim you. You belong to the earth now." Olivia's vision blurred. Her heart pounded in her chest as the roots tightened around her, pulling her forward. She could feel her body being dragged into the soil, the earth's cold embrace wrapping around her legs, her torso. The ground beneath her seemed to crack and shift with each pull, the weight of the curse sinking deeper into her skin. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of something old and ancient awakening from its slumber. And yet, somewhere within the madness and the fear, Olivia felt a strange surge of resolve. The forest, the curse, the tree, it was all connected. The tree at the center of the barn was not just some random symbol of the land's hunger. It was the heart of it, the source of the curse. The ancient tree, it had to be stopped. With a final cry of defiance, Olivia wrenched herself free from the root's grasp, her arms shaking with the effort. She didn't know how, but in that moment, she could feel the power in the earth, the very pulse of it under her feet. The ground beneath her feet was alive, but it was not invincible. "Everyone, we need to destroy the roots," she shouted, her voice hoarse. She barely recognized herself, but it didn't matter. They needed to act now. She grabbed Mia's arm and pulled her away from the tree, ignoring the sting of the roots that reached out to drag her back. Mia looked at Olivia with wild eyes, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "But we can't. It's too powerful. Look at it. It's alive." Olivia's heart raced, but she didn't stop. She glanced at the others, Jake, Sam, Emma, and found the same fear in their eyes. But beneath that fear, there was something else, a spark. They weren't ready to give in. Not yet. "Together," Olivia shouted. "We fight together. We destroy the roots, break the heart of this thing. We can still stop it." Sam was the next to move, his legs trembling as he forced himself to stand. "Where do we start?" he asked, looking around frantically. The barn was a maze of darkness, its walls covered in the twisting roots that snaked like veins across the floor, pulsing with an unnatural life. "At the center," Olivia said, pointing to the roots emerging from the tree. "We take down the heart of the forest. We tear out the roots." Mia nodded, still clutching the shard of wood. She raised it, her grip shaky but determined. "We need to burn it. Fire's the only thing that can stop this." Jake's face hardened. "I can make a fire," he said, "but we need something to light it. We need fuel. Fast." Olivia's eyes scanned the barn, her thoughts racing. And then she saw it. Stacks of old, dry hay in the corner, just waiting to be used. "Perfect. Get the hay," she barked, urgency in her voice. "Gather it quickly." Mia and Jake rushed toward the hay, grabbing armfuls and piling them near the tree. The roots, sensing their movement, jerked violently, but Olivia and the others didn't hesitate. They were running out of time. Sam pulled his shirt off and ripped it into strips, tying it around the nearest root to try and slow it down. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. "We're gonna burn down the entire place." "Doesn't matter," Olivia snapped, her voice tight. "If we don't do this, the forest will take us all. We have no choice." They piled the hay high, the scent of dried grass and old wood thick in the air. Olivia could feel the temperature rising as the roots pulsed faster, more erratically. The barn seemed to be shifting, like it was alive, ready to strike. Jake held up a lighter, his hands shaking as he flicked it on. "Ready?" he asked, his voice strained. "Do it," Olivia said, her eyes never leaving the tree. Jake set the hay alight. The flames caught quickly, licking at the dry straw, spreading faster than Olivia had anticipated. The fire crackled to life, a fierce, wild thing that seemed to roar at the roots of the tree. The roots recoiled as the fire reached them, shriveling, cracking, and burning as the flames spread through the barn. "No!" the thing, Ben screamed, its voice tearing through the barn. "You cannot destroy it. You cannot stop the harvest." But the fire was already spreading, the heat intense and wild. The roots writhed in agony as the flames reached the heart of the tree, and Olivia watched, her heart hammering in her chest, as the tree's bark began to crack and splinter under the heat. Then, with a deafening roar, the tree, the heart of the curse, split open, and the ground shook. The air seemed to implode, the walls of the barn rattling violently as if the earth itself was convulsing. The fire roared, spreading faster now, reaching the twisted roots that had once been unstoppable. The thing that had once been Ben howled in agony as the roots shriveled and burned. Its form flickered, distorted by the flames, until it was nothing more than a dark shadow swallowed by the fire. But even as the tree burned, Olivia could feel it. The curse was not over. The forest was still alive, still watching, still hungry. But they had bought themselves time. The ground stopped shaking. The flames crackled and burned the last of the roots to ash. The air around them grew heavy with silence, the hum of the forest gone. Olivia stood, panting, as the fire consumed the barn behind them. The smoke stung her eyes, but she didn't care. They had done it. They had survived. For now. The fire roared behind them, a wall of orange and red that lit up the dark sky, but Olivia and the others didn't stop to watch. They had no time. The land had been shaken, the heart of the curse burned, but that didn't mean they were free. They knew better than to think the forest was done with them. Their feet pounded against the dirt, the air thick with the smell of smoke and the faint, sickly sweet scent of burning wood. The fog had thinned, but it still clung to the trees, swirling in eerie tendrils that seemed to reach for them. They couldn't escape that feeling, that pull, like the forest was still calling, still hungry. Olivia glanced over her shoulder. The barn was nothing but a smoldering skeleton, the flames licking at the charred remains of the tree. The fire had consumed it all almost. There was still something there. A whisper, an echo, the faintest hum in the ground beneath their feet. "We can't go back," she said, her voice tight with the weight of what they had just done. "Even if the tree's gone, this place, it's never going to be the same. It's not over." Mia, breathless and shaking, turned to face her. "What do you mean? The fire, it's gone. We did it. We destroyed the heart of the curse. It has to be over." Olivia shook her head. "It's never that simple. The forest is not just a tree. It's the land, the roots. We've only weakened it, not destroyed it." She paused, glancing around at the others. "We have to leave. Now." They kept moving, stumbling through the thickening fog, but the oppressive weight of the forest was still there, hanging in the air. Sam, usually the first to crack a joke in times like these, was silent now. His eyes flickered nervously to the trees around them. "What if we leave this place and it follows us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake shook his head. "No way. We burn that thing down, and it's over. We get out of here, and we never come back." But Olivia wasn't so sure. She could feel it in her bones. The land was watching, waiting. The hum, that deep, ancient resonance beneath the ground, hadn't stopped. It was like the land was breathing, as though the forest itself was still alive, still aware of them. The trees shifted slightly, as if something within them was stirring. Olivia froze. "I told you," she said softly. "It's not over." The others stopped too, their eyes wide with fear. Something had changed in the air. The forest was quiet, but not in the way it had been before. It was like it was holding its breath. And then they heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed through the fog. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something worse. A presence that had lain dormant beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The ground shifted beneath their feet once more, and then the trees moved. They weren't just swaying in the wind. They were bending, reaching toward them, the branches creaking with a life of their own. The fog churned, and in the distance, Olivia saw something moving, a shadow too large to be just a trick of the light. Her breath caught in her throat as the shape began to take form. The thing from the barn, or something worse. It was the forest itself, twisted and malformed. The roots they had burned, they were coming back, creeping from the ground like serpents, growing, stretching, rising from the earth. The trees were alive, no longer simply swaying in the wind. Now they were watching them. It was the forest's true form. "The land, it is the harvest," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. The others stood frozen, their fear palpable in the thickening mist. "Run," Olivia whispered again, more urgently this time. "Run." Without another word, they all broke into a sprint, their legs screaming, their hearts pounding. The trees seemed to close in around them, the fog curling like fingers, trying to pull them back into the depths of the forest. Roots shot up from the ground, breaking through the earth, grasping for their ankles, their legs. Olivia didn't look back. She couldn't. She knew that if she did, she'd see it, the forest itself, hunting them down. But she couldn't let it catch her. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. She heard a scream behind her. It was Emma. Without thinking, Olivia turned. Emma had been caught. A massive root had wrapped itself around her waist, pulling her toward the ground, toward the heart of the forest. Emma's eyes were wide with panic as she clawed at the root, trying to free herself. "Emma!" Olivia screamed. "No!" She dashed toward her, but the root was too strong, too thick. Emma's screams echoed through the fog as she was dragged down into the earth, disappearing into the blackness below. Olivia reached for her, but stopped short. She knew there was no way to save her, not like this. With a wrenching sob, she turned and continued running, her legs burning with exhaustion. She heard the others behind her, Sam, Jake, Mia, but they were all running too fast to look back, to check on what had happened to Emma. They couldn't. They had to survive. But the forest was relentless. The growl grew louder, deeper, and something huge shifted in the fog ahead of them. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as the shape emerged. It was no longer the twisted figure of Ben, but something far worse. The trees had come to life, a massive form, like an ancient, monstrous creature made entirely of roots and bark, its eyes glowing like twin embers. The forest had awakened, and it had claimed them all. It was hunting them. Olivia's heart pounded as she realized that escape was impossible. And then, before they could even comprehend what was happening, the fog enveloped them. The air grew thick, suffocating, and in the distance, they heard the trees begin to whisper, their voices low and ancient. "You cannot run. You are the harvest." The fog swallowed them whole, suffocating everything in its path, and Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs as she sprinted blindly through the darkness. The oppressive weight of the forest was everywhere, its breath, its whispers, its hunger. The land was alive, and it was after them. Behind her, the others ran too, but the sound of the roots moving in the soil, the growls from the depths of the fog, told her they weren't going to make it if they didn't do something fast. Olivia's legs burned, her lungs screamed for air, but she couldn't stop. The forest was tightening around them, the ground beneath them shaking, as though the earth itself was waking up to claim its victims. She glanced over her shoulder, just in time to see the massive form moving through the mist, a hulking shape made of roots, bark, and twisted limbs. The creature was closing in. It had no face, no eyes, just an overwhelming presence, like the forest itself had manifested into something monstrous. The roots twisted and moved like living things, slithering through the soil, reaching for them. She could hear the others, their desperate footsteps behind her, but she couldn't tell who was still with her. They were scattered, their fear overwhelming any sense of unity. It was every person for themselves now, but Olivia couldn't abandon them. Not again. She heard Sam shout, followed by a sickening crack. He was gone. Olivia didn't have to look to know. She could feel it in her gut. One by one, the forest was picking them off, dragging them down into the earth. The world around her felt unreal, like she was in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. The trees seemed to stretch upward, twisting and writhing, their branches reaching for the sky like fingers of some ancient god. The earth itself pulsed beneath her feet, a rhythmic beat that echoed deep within her chest. Olivia's mind was racing. She needed to fight back. They had burned the heart of the curse, but they had never destroyed the land itself. The forest wasn't just a place, it was something older, something that had always been there. In the distance, she saw Mia. She was stumbling, but alive, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Olivia's breath caught as she realized that there was only one way out. Mia! Olivia screamed, her voice hoarse from fear and exhaustion. Mia turned, her eyes wide with terror. What are we going to do? Mia gasped, her breath short. It's everywhere. The trees. There. Alive. Olivia reached out, grabbing Mia's arm. We need to find the source. The roots, they're the key. The trees, they're not just trees. They're the forest. The curse. We need to destroy the roots. Mia looked around, her eyes scanning the dark woods as the creature neared, its massive form dragging itself through the fog, roots rising from the ground like a monstrous snake. The air was thick with the scent of decay. Where do we go? Mia asked, her voice desperate. Olivia's eyes searched the horizon. She remembered the stories, the whispers they'd heard around the campfire, the ones about the ancient forest, about the root that connected everything, the source of the forest's dark power. It had to be real. It had to be. The clearing, Olivia said suddenly. The clearing near the old ruins. That's where the roots began. We have to get there? Mia nodded, barely able to breathe as she ran alongside Olivia. The growl of the creature was closer now, its presence overwhelming, and Olivia felt the panic creeping into her chest. But she couldn't let it consume her, not now. They ran faster, moving deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees closed in around them, their branches twisting and cracking as they pressed forward, as though trying to stop them. The roots broke through the soil beneath their feet, lashing out, wrapping around their legs. But they kept going. They had no choice. After what felt like an eternity, they broke through the trees and emerged into a clearing. The ancient ruins were just ahead. Olivia stumbled to a stop, her heart racing in her chest as she took in the sight before her. The ruins were old, crumbling stones that had long since been overtaken by the forest. But there was something about the place. It was alive in a way that the rest of the forest wasn't. The roots here were thick, twisting, and pulsing with dark energy, stretching from the earth like veins. This was it. This is where it all began, Olivia said, her voice trembling. This is the heart of the forest. Mia's eyes were wide with terror as she glanced around. What do we do? How do we stop it? Olivia's mind raced. The ground beneath them began to shake as the creature drew closer, its roots rising from the earth to grab them. The air around them grew thick, suffocating, the trees pressing in on all sides. The land itself was alive, and it wanted them. We destroy the roots, Olivia said, her voice steady despite the panic gnawing at her insides. We have to sever the connection. We take out the source. Mia looked at her, fear in her eyes. How? Olivia scanned the ruins, her heart pounding. The answer was right in front of her. The ground around the ruins was thick with roots, but in the center, beneath the ancient stones, there was something different. A massive root, twisting and coiling beneath the earth. She could feel the energy pulsing through it, like it was alive, like it was the very heart of the forest itself. The creature was upon them. With one last desperate breath, Olivia ran forward, grabbing a jagged stone from the ruins and slamming it into the root. The ground shook as the stone shattered, but the root barely flinched. She gritted her teeth and struck again, harder this time. The roots around them reacted, jerking violently, as if the earth itself was screaming in pain. The creature's growl grew louder, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Mia grabbed Olivia's arm. It's not working. We need to do something else. Olivia's mind raced. The fire. The fire had been their weapon before. Fire could destroy the forest, burn the roots, sever the connection. She looked around and spotted a cluster of dry leaves and twigs nearby, remnants of old underbrush. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Light it, Olivia ordered. Light it now. Mia didn't hesitate. She grabbed the matches from her bag and quickly struck one, setting the dry leaves alight. The fire caught quickly, flickering and growing in mid. As it spread, the roots around them began to hiss and snap, the smoke rising in thick columns. But it wasn't enough. The creature, the forest, it was still moving, still coming. Olivia turned back to the root beneath the stones. It was pulsing with dark power, and in that moment, she knew what had to be done. She grabbed Mia's arm again. "Get back! Now!" With one last surge of strength, Olivia reached into the heart of the root, grabbed it with both hands, and yanked as hard as she could. The earth screamed. The roots twisted, snapping and breaking apart as the ground cracked open. The root, the heart of the forest, began to tear apart, and the creature that had been stalking them howled in rage. The fire blazed higher. The land trembled. And then for the first time in days, the silence fell. The smoke from the fire still hung thick in the air, swirling around them in ominous tendrils. But for the first time since they had set foot in the cursed forest, Olivia felt a fleeting sense of relief. The roots beneath her hands had shattered, the heart of the forest broken. The monstrous creature had retreated into the fog, its angry howls fading into nothingness. The earth beneath them, once alive with a pulsing, dark energy, now felt still. Silent. For a moment, it almost seemed like everything was over. But Olivia knew better. She could feel it in the air, the unnatural calm that lingered. They had destroyed the heart, yes. But had they truly ended the curse? Or had they only pushed it back? She took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from her brow as the fire continued to crackle behind her. Mia stood beside her, her eyes wide, filled with a mix of awe and exhaustion. They had made it through, but at what cost? "How do you feel?" Olivia asked, her voice hoarse. Mia shook her head slowly, her breath shaky. "I don't know. I think we're alive. But is it really over?" The creature, the forest. It's gone, right? Olivia glanced at the ruins. The flames had begun to die down, leaving only smoldering ashes behind. The roots were burned away, the cursed energy dissipating with the smoke. But something nagged at the back of her mind. It felt like a temporary victory. "I think we did it," Olivia said cautiously, her eyes scanning the clearing. "But I'm not sure it's done yet. The forest, it's ancient. It doesn't just give up like that." Mia frowned, her gaze darting nervously to the edge of the clearing. "What do you mean? You think it's coming back?" Olivia didn't answer right away. She was thinking about what she had felt when she had torn into the root. The way the earth had screamed. The way the forest had fought back. It was as though the land was alive, and it didn't just die when you heard it. It recoiled. Suddenly, there was a sound, a creak, like the groaning of an old, dying tree. It was faint, but it was enough to make Olivia's blood run cold. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the perimeter of the clearing. At first, she didn't see anything. And then the trees moved. Not like before. It wasn't just the branches swaying in the wind, but the trunks themselves shifting, twisting, groaning as if they were waking from a deep slumber. And then the ground began to tremble once more. "Oh no," Olivia whispered, her heart sinking. Mia grabbed her arm, her fingers cold and trembling. "What's happening?" "The forest," Olivia muttered. "It's not gone. It's infected." The trees around them groaned again, the roots rising from the ground like twisted fingers, reaching for them. It was as if the land was rebelling, unable to accept the destruction of its heart. The curse hadn't just been a tree. It had been a force, an ancient evil buried deep in the earth. The destruction of the root had only created a wound, a gaping hole in the fabric of the forest, and the land was fighting back. And then, through the shifting fog, Olivia saw someone. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe the fog playing tricks on her mind. But no, it was real. Ben. The figure moved through the trees, a shadow among the smoke, his body twisted and broken in ways that didn't look human. He had been consumed by the forest. He had been a part of it. Olivia's heart lurched in her chest. Ben. He had died. She had seen it. He was gone. But now he was here. And he wasn't just a man anymore. His eyes were empty hollow. His skin was pale and stretched tight, the veins beneath it black and pulsing with a dark, unnatural energy. He was no longer Ben. He was a creature, one that had been corrupted by the curse, remade by the forest's insidious power. "No," Olivia whispered, stepping back, her breath quickening. "Ben!" Mia's voice cracked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ben's head tilted slowly, his neck snapping in a way that wasn't natural. He took a slow step forward, his limbs jerking in unnatural angles. He didn't speak, but the whisper of the forest, the same voice they had heard before, came from him. "You can't escape. The forest claims all." Mia took a step back, her eyes filling with tears. No, this can't be happening. Ben, you're dead. This isn't you." But Ben, no, the thing that had been Ben just continued to shuffle forward, his movements jerky, inhuman. The ground around him twisted and churned, as if it was pulling him back into the earth. The roots reached for him, and yet he moved freely, as if the forest was keeping him alive. Olivia felt her pulse quicken. She grabbed Mia's arm again, pulling her away. "We need to leave. Now. This place, it's not safe. It's never been safe." Mia opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat as another growl erupted from the trees, louder this time, closer. The monster from before, the ancient forest creature, had returned. Its massive, rotting form emerged from the fog, its eyes glowing, its mouth gaping wide, filled with rows of sharp teeth. It wasn't just a forest anymore. It was something worse. Something twisted and warped, just like Ben. The land had never truly given up its hunger. "We're not leaving," Olivia said, her voice tight. "We have to destroy it all. Everything. If we don't, the curse will never end." But Mia's eyes were wide with terror. "What? How? The root is gone. The forest is burning. We can't." "We can," Olivia said, her voice hard with determination. She turned to face the ruins. The fire still burned weakly in the center of the clearing, the smoke rising into the sky, but it wasn't enough. She had to finish what they'd started. The roots were still alive beneath the earth. They needed to burn deeper. This isn't the end. We can't let it take us. Mia glanced at her, and though fear still gripped her, there was a spark of resolve in her eyes. "Then let's finish this." Together, they turned toward the burning ruins, ready to fight against the forest's wrath. But this time, they knew the true cost. Nothing would be left untouched. The ground continued to tremble beneath their feet as the massive creature lurched toward them, its roots slithering through the dirt, clawing at the earth like hungry hands reaching from the abyss. The air around them was thick with smoke, but beneath it was something else, an energy, dark and suffocating, curling like a serpent around their minds. Olivia felt it too. The forest wasn't just alive. It was a force, a living, breathing entity that had only been weakened, not destroyed. "We have to destroy it," Olivia said through gritted teeth. Her eyes darted to the fire burning in the clearing, weak but still flickering. She could feel the heat of it, but it wasn't enough. It wouldn't be enough to stop the creature, to stop the forest from claiming them. "But how?" Mia asked, her voice cracking. "We can't just set fire to the whole forest. It's too big. It's too much." Olivia looked around, her mind racing. There had to be something. There had to be some way to sever the bond between the forest and the curse that had been embedded in its roots for centuries. They had burned the heart, but they had failed to take down the full extent of the land's power. Her gaze locked on the ruins again. The stone structures that were slowly crumbling in the smoke seemed wrong. There was something in them, something ancient, something tied to the curse itself. The answer was there. She just had to reach it. She didn't have time to think about it. The creature was drawing closer, and Ben's twisted form was still stumbling through the trees, his empty eyes fixed on them. "Olivia." Mia's voice was barely a whisper, filled with fear. "I know," Olivia said, her breath shallow. "We can't let it get to us." They had to finish what they started. There was no other choice. "Help me," Olivia shouted as she rushed toward the ruins, her boots crunching against the ash and dirt. Mia hesitated for a moment, then followed. They reached the stone structures, their ancient surfaces cracked and weathered. Olivia's hands trembled as she ran her fingers over the stones, feeling their cold, ancient presence. There was something here, something tied to the forest, to the curse. She could feel it in her bones. "There has to be something we're missing," she muttered. She remembered the stories they'd heard around the campfire, the whispers about the altar that had once stood at the heart of the forest, the place where the ritual had begun, the source of the curse. The altar had been destroyed. But what if its power had been transferred to the very land? The forest wasn't just rooted in soil. It had once been anchored in an idea, a dark ritual, a pact with something far older than them. Olivia reached down, her hand trembling as she pressed it against the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, beneath her palm, the stone began to pulse. It was a subtle vibration at first, barely noticeable. But then it grew stronger, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. "Mia," Olivia gasped. "Help me move this stone." Mia didn't hesitate. She rushed to her side, and together they pushed against the massive stone. It scraped against the ground with a deep, resonating groan, but they kept pushing. The stone shifted, revealing something beneath it, something old, blackened by the centuries. A deep, hollow well, long forgotten, sealed away. Olivia's pulse quickened. She could feel it, the ancient power that had been hidden here, buried beneath the earth. It wasn't just a well. It was a portal, a passage, the heart of the forest. She knelt down, peering into the darkness. There was a faint glow at the bottom, pulsing with a sickly, greenish light. "It's still alive," Olivia whispered. Mia swallowed hard. "What is it? What is that thing?" "I think." Olivia hesitated. She knew what it was, but the idea of it terrified her. "I think it's the source of the curse." She reached into her pocket, pulling out the small vial of the herb they had used to slow the curse's spread earlier. It wasn't much, but it was something. It might help, just enough to give them a chance. "Mia, the fire," Olivia said. "We need to light the fire. We need to burn it all before the forest can take over completely." Mia's eyes widened, realization dawning. "You want to set fire to the well? To that thing?" "It's the only way," Olivia replied, her voice firm. "We burn it. We destroy the root of this curse, once and for all." Mia didn't argue. She pulled a match from her bag and struck it quickly, tossing it onto the dry brush that surrounded the well. The flames caught, crackling up the sides of the well. The sickly green light pulsed and flickered as the fire grew, but instead of fading, the glow seemed to grow stronger, its tendrils reaching up as though trying to pull the flames back down. "It's not working," Mia said, panic rising in her voice. Olivia's heart pounded. She grabbed the vial and poured its contents into the fire. The liquid hissed, sending a burst of light into the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the flames flared, a bright, intense heat that felt like it was burning through the earth. And then the ground split. The well cracked open with a deafening roar, releasing a surge of energy that rippled through the entire clearing. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently as the fire spread, licking at the roots of the forest, searing them as they reached for the sky. But it wasn't just the roots. The flames spread, consuming the very air itself, filling the clearing with an infernal light. The creature screamed. The forest screamed. Olivia could feel it now, the forest pain. It wasn't just angry. It was dying. The land was screaming, its life force being burned away, piece by piece. The fire was breaking the bond, severing the curse, but it came at a cost. The forest didn't want to die, but it had no choice. And then, the scream stopped. The trees fell silent. The creature disappeared into the fog, its form dissolving like smoke, its twisted figure vanishing in the flames. The earth stilled. Olivia collapsed to her knees, her hands trembling as the fire burned away the last remnants of the curse. The smoke was thick, but in the distance, she could see the first light of dawn breaking through the fog. It was over. For the first time in days, there was silence. A deep, unbroken silence. The forest was no longer alive, no longer hungry. But at what cost? The clearing was a charred, smoking ruin. The trees were gone, reduced to ash. The creatures were gone, their twisted forms erased by the flames. Everything that had been corrupted by the forest curse had burned away. And as Olivia stood, her breath shallow, she realized that they were the last. The land had claimed so many, but they had fought back and won. For now. But the forest would always be there, waiting in the shadows, ready to reclaim what had been taken. The dawn broke slowly, its light faint and fragile, casting a soft glow over the blackened remnants of the forest. It was as though the land had been holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for this. Olivia stood amidst the ruins, her face smeared with soot and sweat, her body aching from the ordeal. Her lungs burned with the thick smoke that lingered in the air, but the oppressive weight she'd carried for days, the suffocating pressure of the curse, had finally lifted. It was over, and yet, there was no sense of triumph in her heart, only emptiness. The fire that had consumed the forest had also consumed so much more: memories, lives, the very soul of the place. She had destroyed a thing of ancient power, a curse that had been festering for centuries. But at what cost? Mia was standing next to her, her expression distant, eyes glazed as she looked at the wreckage around them. The silence felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. "I thought we'd feel something more," Mia said softly, almost as if to herself. "Like relief, but it just feels empty." Olivia didn't respond right away. Her gaze lingered on the charred earth, where the forest had once been alive. The fire had reduced the trees to ash, the animals to dust. There was nothing left but the remnants of what had been. "Maybe it's because we've lost too much," Olivia said at last. Her voice felt like a whisper in the vast emptiness. "We didn't just fight the forest. We fought everything it was, everything it had been. And in the end, we had to destroy it. We had to destroy it all." Mia nodded slowly, her eyes following the faint remnants of smoke curling upward into the sky. "But what about Ben?" Olivia's heart clenched. Ben. She could still see his face, the way he had stumbled toward them, twisted by the forest, his humanity lost. That image of him, broken and hollow, would never leave her. "We couldn't save him," Olivia said, her voice thick with guilt. "He was already gone. But we stopped the curse before it could take anyone else. We stopped it before it could take us." Mia's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly, as if trying to deny the grief that was washing over her. "I should have done something. I should have." "You did what you could," Olivia interrupted gently. "We all did, and now it's over." The words felt hollow. How could it be over when they'd lost so much? When they'd witnessed the horrors of the forest, when they'd seen the twisted creatures, the death, the destruction. How could any of it be truly over? "I just want to go home," Mia said, her voice breaking. Olivia turned toward her, her eyes softening. "I know." There was a long pause, and then Olivia felt something shift in the air. It wasn't the wind, nor the smoke. It was a subtle, unsettling feeling, like a whisper just out of reach, too faint to catch. A prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. She spun around, her heart racing. There, in the distance where the trees had once stood, there was something. A shadow. A figure. "No," Olivia breathed. Mia turned and saw it too. The shape was impossible to make out at first, barely visible against the rising light of day, but it moved. Slowly, purposefully. A figure that shouldn't exist. It wasn't a person. Not fully. It was more like a distortion in the world, an entity that wasn't quite there, yet. The air around it shimmered, like heat rising from the ground, and it was pulling itself toward them, step by step. Olivia's pulse quickened. She had felt it earlier. Something wasn't right. They hadn't destroyed the curse. Not all of it. There was still something left. Something that had been waiting. "Stay behind me," Olivia said to Mia, her voice sharp. But Mia didn't move. She was transfixed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What is that? What is it?" Olivia's heart thundered in her chest as the figure grew clearer. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its shape seemed to shift like it was flickering in and out of existence, fading in and out of reality. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close to being human. And yet Olivia could feel it. It wasn't a part of the forest. It wasn't the creature. It wasn't the curse, not directly. It was something far older, something that had been awakened. Without thinking, Olivia reached for the last of the herbs they had, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the small pouch. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't even know what this thing was. But she had to try. The figure's presence grew stronger, more oppressive as it drew closer. Its form flickered again, then stabilized just long enough for Olivia to catch a glimpse of its face. It was Ben, or something that looked like him. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale, stretched thin, like he was a vessel for something far more terrifying. His mouth was twisted into a grotesque, inhuman smile, sharp, jagged teeth gleaming in the dim light. No, it wasn't Ben. It couldn't be. But the resemblance, the echo of his face, was impossible to ignore. The thing, whatever it was, opened its mouth, and in a voice that sent chills down Olivia's spine, it whispered, "The forest is never truly gone. It is only waiting. You've freed it from its chains, but the price is yet to be paid." Olivia's stomach churned. The words didn't make sense, yet they did, in a terrifying, surreal way. The forest had been destroyed, yes, but the thing before them, whatever it was a part of the curse. It had been waiting for the moment when the forest would fall, when it would be free to claim the last of what remained. And now it was here. She didn't hesitate. She threw the herbs into the air, the scent of them filling the clearing. The air crackled with energy, the wind picking up. A strange sound, like the distant howling of wind through trees, filled the air. The figure stopped moving. For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a horrifying screech, the thing collapsed to the ground, its form flickering violently, as if it were being torn apart by unseen hands. It writhed and shrieked, its body distorting like a nightmare. And then silence. The creature was gone. But Olivia knew, deep down, that the forest would never truly be gone. It had seeped into the bones of the land, and as long as there was a breath of life left in the earth, it would remain waiting. She looked at Mia, her eyes filled with exhaustion. "It's over," Olivia whispered. But not really. The forest would always be there, waiting for the next moment of weakness, the next time it could claim what was left. The silence that followed the creature's final, shrieking collapse seemed unnatural. It stretched on, broken only by the sound of Olivia's ragged breathing and the distant crackle of the last embers. The weight in the air had not dissipated, though. The forest presence was still there, like a lingering shadow pressing against their skin. Olivia stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the spot where the thing had once been. There was no trace of it now, no evidence left in the wake of its destruction. It had vanished, as if it had never existed at all. But she knew it had. The forest had been alive. But this, whatever this was, had been its keeper, its final guardian. It had been waiting for the right moment, the moment when they would destroy the heart of the forest and expose its true power. And now, that power was free. Olivia. Mia's voice cracked through the stillness. She was standing beside her, staring into the distance, her face pale. "I don't understand. What was that? What is it?" Olivia swallowed hard, forcing herself to break away from the spot where the creature had vanished. "I don't know," she said, her voice hollow. "But I know it wasn't just a part of the forest. It was something else, something older, and it wants something from us. Mia shuddered. How can it still be alive? We burned it. We destroyed the trees, the creature. We killed it all. No, Olivia said, shaking her head. We didn't kill it. We banished it for now. That thing, whatever it is, it's part of something far bigger. The forest wasn't just the land. It was a doorway, a vessel for something far older than any of us. And when we burned it, we didn't destroy that thing. We've released it. Mia took a step back, her eyes widening in realization. You mean, it's not over, Olivia said, her voice a whisper. The curse, it's still here. It's still waiting. We've only just begun to fight it. They both fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. A new thought gripped Olivia then, a thought so terrifying it made her blood run cold. What if the thing that had haunted them, Ben, the creature, the forest itself, was only the beginning? She had felt it when the creature had spoken, the deep, resonating truth in its words. The forest was not just a forest. It was a door, a link to something older, something far more powerful. And they had broken that door open, whether they knew it or not. Something had been released into the world. We need to go back, Olivia said suddenly, her eyes snapping to Mia. We need to find the others. We can't do this alone. Mia's eyes narrowed. The others? Olivia hesitated. I'm not sure what the forest did to the others, to the people we left behind. But it wasn't just us. We weren't the only ones who were affected by it. We need to know what happened to them. Mia nodded, her face a mix of confusion and growing fear. Do you think they'll be like Ben? I don't know, Olivia replied, the weight of the thought settling over her like a thick fog. But I'm not going to find out the hard way. We have to be prepared. Mia looked toward the edge of the clearing where the trees once stood. The forest, though destroyed, still seemed to hum beneath her feet, as though its roots still reached into the world beyond, tapping into some dark, unseen energy. There was no going back to what they had known. Nothing would ever be the same. We should get moving, Olivia said, pulling herself from the depths of her thoughts. We need to be as far from here as possible. The curse is still there lurking, and it's not done with us. They turned and walked away from the scorched remains of the forest, the ground beneath them still warm from the fire that had raged through it. But the feeling of unease never left them. Every step they took, every breath they drew, felt like it was leading them deeper into something they couldn't fully comprehend. As they walked, Olivia kept her eyes scanning the horizon, half expecting the forest to rise up once again, to swallow them whole. The trees had burned. The curse had been fought. But the echo remained, and that echo was growing louder. Days passed, but they brought no relief. As they moved further from the clearing, the weight of their actions settled more heavily on Olivia's shoulders. There were no answers. There were no signs that the curse had truly been banished. The world seemed quieter now, emptier, like the echo of something that had once been alive but had slipped into an eternal sleep. But Olivia could feel it. It was watching them, waiting. They reached the town by dusk, but something was wrong. The streets were eerily quiet. No children played in the yards. No lights flickered through the windows. The air was still, heavy, as if the entire town was holding its breath. They made their way to the town center, where they had last seen the others. But as they neared the familiar square, Olivia's heart skipped a beat. The door to the old church stood wide open, its wooden frame creaking in the wind. And from within, there was a faint, distant sound. A low, guttural hum that seemed to resonate in the air. Mia looked at Olivia, her eyes wide with fear. Olivia, something's wrong. Olivia nodded, her hand tightening around the strap of her pack. Stay close, she whispered. We don't know what's inside. They stepped cautiously into the church, the old wooden floor groaning beneath their feet. The space was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of candles scattered around the room. The hum grew louder, pulsing in time with their footsteps. At the altar, figures moved, silent, ghostly shapes that were impossible to make out in the shadows. And then one of them turned. It was Ben. But it wasn't Ben. His face was hollow, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light, his mouth twisted in a silent, grim smile. And as Olivia's gaze swept across the room, she saw others. The people they had thought were lost. The survivors. Their eyes were the same as Ben's. Hollow, empty. And then, as if responding to her presence, they all turned toward her. In unison. And in that moment, Olivia knew the truth. The forest had never really been defeated. It had only been delayed. The curse, the ancient thing that had watched over the land, had found a new host. It had taken them, and now it was coming for her. The sound of the humming grew louder, the air thick with a suffocating energy. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest as she scanned the room. The faces of the people she thought she knew now twisted and unrecognizable. Their eyes, once full of life, now gleamed with something far darker, something ancient and hungry. Olivia, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. What is happening? What's wrong with them? Olivia swallowed hard, her mind racing. She knew the answer. It was exactly what she had feared. The curse had never been fully contained. It had spread, infecting everything it touched, and now the town, the people they had once considered safe, had become its vessels. They're not the people we knew anymore, Olivia said quietly, though the words felt foreign on her tongue. The forest, it's using them. It's turned them into something else. Something alive, but not really. The figures in the room began to move, slowly, deliberately, their eyes locked on the two of them. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy, a palpable force drawing them all. Together, Olivia could feel it, too. The pull, the pressure, the growing connection between her and the people standing before her. The curse wasn't just in the forest. It had spread a web of darkness, binding them all. Why are they looking at us like that? Mia whispered, her voice shaky as she clung to Olivia's side. Olivia took a step back, instinctively trying to put distance between them and the otherworldly figures. Because they know us. They want us. The curse is calling us, just like it called to Ben, to everyone who came before us. It's trying to pull us in. The figures began to move faster, their bodies jerking unnaturally, as if they were no longer bound by human limits. Ben, his hollow eyes locked onto Olivia, was the first to speak. You can't escape, he rasped, his voice an eerie blend of familiarity and something deeper. The forest is inside you now. It has always been inside you. It has claimed you. You are part of it. Olivia's pulse spiked as she took a step back. The weight of his words pressed down on her like an invisible force. Part of it. She had felt it ever since they stepped foot into the forest. That sickening connection, the way it had called to them, to their blood, to their souls. No, Olivia whispered, shaking her head. You're not Ben. Not anymore. His lips curled into a smile, one that wasn't his, a smile full of malice. We were all chosen. We were all meant to become one with it. You can't run from your fate. The others, the survivors, began to step forward, their movements erratic but purposeful. Their eyes glowed, a sickly green hue that made Olivia's stomach churn. She could feel it now, like a pulse, a thrum in the air that resonated deep within her chest. It was calling to her. The forest's essence was inside her, just as Ben had said. She could feel its tendrils, buried deep in her mind, pulling at her thoughts, trying to take hold. You have to fight it, Mia urged, her voice trembling with panic. Don't listen to them. We can still get out of here. But Olivia was frozen, her gaze locked onto the figure of Ben, his smile stretching impossibly wide. You can't escape us, he repeated, his voice now a whisper, a command. We are the forest, and you are ours. Suddenly, a wave of energy slammed into Olivia, knocking her to the ground. The room around her blurred, the faces of the people she had known spinning like shadows in her mind. The air, was thick with the overwhelming presence of the forest, its grip on her tightening, wrapping around her like vines, suffocating the life out of her. Mia, Olivia gasped, struggling to get to her feet. But the energy surged again, pulling her back down, drowning her in darkness. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The faces of the others, Ben, the survivors, the townspeople, were closing in around her, their eyes burning with an unholy light, their mouths moving in unison, chanting words that sounded like an ancient prayer, a ritual she could not understand. The forest was alive, and it was everywhere. In the room, in the town, in her mind. You belong to it, Ben's voice echoed, now all around her. You always have. You cannot escape. And then the world went dark. Olivia awoke in a place she didn't recognize, her mind foggy and disoriented. Her body ached, her limbs heavy, as if she were waking from a nightmare that had lasted for centuries. She blinked, trying to clear the haze from her vision, but it only grew worse, as if the world around her was shifting, warping, changing, becoming something else. She was lying in a forest, but it wasn't the one she had fought to destroy. This was different. The trees were larger, the air thicker, charged with an energy she couldn't describe. The ground beneath her was soft, like it had absorbed the very essence of the world, every inch of it pulsing with life. Olivia tried to sit up, but something held her down. She looked at her hands, her skin, her body. There was no blood, no marks, no sign of the fight that had taken place in the church. Instead, her skin seemed almost alive, more alive than it had ever been before. It shimmered in the dim light, as though it were made of something other than flesh. Olivia. Mia's voice drifted from somewhere nearby, soft, ethereal. It sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. Mia. Olivia tried to call out, but the words died in her throat. Her voice felt strange, too, as if it didn't belong to her. Mia, she repeated a little louder this time. From the shadows, Mia stepped forward, but not the Mia Olivia knew. She looked different, changed, her eyes now glowing that same sickly green as the others. Her hair flowed, unnaturally, like it was part of the wind itself. She stood tall, her posture rigid, like a puppet on strings. What? What happened to you? Olivia whispered, her voice shaking. Mia, please. Mia didn't speak. Instead, her lips curled into a smile, one that wasn't hers, just like Ben's. Her eyes gleamed with an unnatural light as she reached out, her fingers brushing Olivia's skin. You are home now, Olivia. Mia's voice came out, but it wasn't Mia. It was the forest speaking through her. We are all part of it now. You will understand. It's only a matter of time. And Olivia realized, with a sinking heart, that she wasn't just fighting the forest anymore. The forest was her. Olivia's mind reeled, a whirlwind of confusion and dread. The forest, the ancient, insidious thing that had haunted their lives, was now more real than ever before. The lines between the forest's power and her own consciousness were blurred, as if she had become part of it. The ground beneath her felt like living flesh, the trees reaching toward her, their limbs bending and swaying as if they were aware of her presence. Mia, or whatever had become of Mia, stood before her, her expression cold and distant. The transformation was complete. She was no longer her best friend, no longer the person Olivia had trusted. She was the forest, and in some way, Olivia had become the same. You're not Mia, Olivia whispered, the words barely escaping her lips as the truth sank in. The smile on Mia's face deepened, an unsettling thing that twisted her features further. Her eyes glowed like sickly fire, the same haunting green light that had overtaken the others. Mia is gone. She was never really here. The forest has always been here, Olivia. And you. You're part of it now, too. A wave of nausea hit Olivia as she struggled to push herself up from the earth. She could feel the energy of the forest pulsing through her veins, its presence invading every thought, every breath. It called to her a pull she couldn't ignore. She had become a vessel for something greater, and yet something far darker. "No, I won't join you," Olivia muttered, shaking her head as if trying to dislodge the creeping thoughts that threatened to take over her mind. She tried to move, to flee, but the ground beneath her shifted like quicksand, holding her in place. "Mia, no." The forest reached out, her hand brushing Olivia's face in a gesture that seemed almost tender. But there was nothing gentle about it. "You have no choice," Mia's voice cooed, her tone both alien and familiar. "It is in you. You can feel it. It will never leave. You will never leave." Olivia's chest tightened. The truth was suffocating. There was no running from it, no fighting it. The forest had marked her. It had marked all of them. Every step they had taken had led them here, to this moment. And now it had her. But why? She could still feel fragments of herself, of the person she had been, trying to rise above the forest's influence, trying to remember what it was like before the curse had consumed everything. "You don't have to do this," Olivia pleaded, her voice shaking as she looked at the twisted version of Mia standing before her. "Please, we can stop it. We can fight it together." But Mia only laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that resonated through the very trees. The laughter was not her own, but something darker, something older. "You don't understand, Olivia." Mia's voice twisted, no longer her own. "You were never meant to fight it. You were meant to join it." With a sudden force, Mia's hand pushed Olivia to the ground. She gasped, the air knocked from her lungs as she collided with the earth. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the world holding its breath, waiting. And then, the ground began to shift again, the roots of the trees twisting beneath her, pulling her deeper into the earth. Olivia's heart raced as she struggled to free herself, but the more she fought, the stronger the pull became. The forest was alive, and it was drawing her in. She could feel the ancient power, the life force that coursed through the trees, and it was too powerful to resist. Is this what they meant by becoming one with it? She thought desperately, the reality of her situation sinking in. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a consciousness, a dark, living force that had infected them all, that had turned their bodies into vessels for its power. They were the forest now, and it was coming for everyone. Suddenly, a voice cut through the suffocating silence, a voice she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Olivia. It was Mia, the real Mia. Her voice was weak, distant, but still unmistakable. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She forced her eyes open, looking for the source of the voice, her heart beating faster with each passing second. "Mia," Olivia whispered. Mia's form appeared, standing at the edge of the clearing, her eyes wide with fear, her expression full of anguish. Her body was still hers, still familiar. It was clear now that this was the Mia Olivia had once known, before the forest had claimed her. "Mia, please," Olivia called, her voice shaking. "Help me. I can't fight it." Mia's face twisted with guilt, her hands reaching toward Olivia in a desperate gesture. "Olivia, you don't have much time," she said, her voice strained and filled with sorrow. I'm sorry. I tried. I wanted to fight it, but it's too strong. It's in me. It's in all of us now. But you have to leave. You have to get out of here before it's too late." Olivia's eyes widened as she looked at Mia, her voice breaking. "What are you saying? You're not lost to it, are you?" "I'm not," Mia whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "But I can't stop it. I can't stop what it's already done to me. To you, the forest. It's inside us, Olivia. It won't let us go. It won't let you go." Olivia's pulse thundered in her ears. No! She couldn't let the forest win. She couldn't let it take her too. Suddenly, Mia collapsed to her knees, her face twisted in agony. "You need to run," she gasped. "Before it's too late." Olivia hesitated, her body still frozen, her mind torn between the real Mia, her friend, and the pull of the curse, the forest demand to stay, to become it. "I don't want to leave you," Olivia whispered, her heart breaking. Mia's eyes softened, her voice trembling with fear. "You have to. You're stronger than this, Olivia. You're stronger than the forest." A cold chill swept through the air, and the ground beneath them trembled. The trees groaned in a terrible, ancient chorus as if agreeing with Mia's words. The forest was coming. It was coming for both of them. With every ounce of strength she had left, Olivia pushed herself to her feet, stumbling away from Mia and the beckoning darkness of the trees. The wind howled around her as she ran, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of the forest, desperate to live. But as she turned to look back, she saw Mia's figure fading into the shadows, just a wisp of a memory. Her friend was lost to the curse, and the forest was closing in, eager to claim what was left. Olivia had only one choice now. She had to escape, or become part of it. The forest pulsed around Olivia, a living entity, its hunger palpable in every crackling leaf, every rustling branch. As she ran, the trees seemed to close in, their gnarled branches reaching out, grasping at her like skeletal hands. The air grew thick, charged with a sickly energy, and the ground beneath her feet shifted, making each step feel more like a struggle against invisible chains. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted through the underbrush, the world spinning around her. Mia's words echoed in her mind, the desperate plea to run, to escape, but Olivia knew that there was nowhere to run. The forest was everywhere. It had already claimed this place, had woven itself into the fabric of this land, into their very bodies. She couldn't outrun it. "No, I won't give in," Olivia thought fiercely, her feet pounding against the ground, pushing through the endless sea of trees. "There has to be a way out. I'll find it. I have to find it." But the forest fought back. The trees loomed taller now, their branches twisting like fingers curling into fists, blocking the path ahead. The ground beneath her feet seemed to rise and fall, as if trying to trip her, to drag her down into the earth. Every direction she turned seemed to lead her back into the heart of the forest, the place she had fled from earlier. Suddenly, the forest went silent. The hum, the thrumming pulse of the dark energy that had filled the air, vanished. The wind stopped. The rustling of the trees fell away. And then she heard it, a voice, low and guttural, whispering through the stillness. "Olivia." She froze. It was the same voice from earlier. The voice that had haunted her, that had filled her dreams and nightmares alike. The forest's voice. "You cannot escape what you are. You cannot escape what you were always meant to be." The words reverberated through her bones, sinking deep into her consciousness. She shook her head violently, trying to push the voice away, trying to block it out. But it was inside her now. It had always been. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't. You belong to us," the voice hissed louder now. "Your blood, your soul. It is ours. You were born for this, to join with us, to be one with the forest." Her legs faltered, and for a brief moment, she felt a pull, an irresistible force tugging at her, urging her to stop running, to fall into its embrace. But she couldn't. She had to keep moving. She had to fight. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, tearing through the underbrush, her hands reaching out in desperation, her mind screaming for a way out. Her eyes scanned frantically, searching for any sign of an escape, any path that would lead her to safety. But the forest didn't give her an answer. It only drew tighter, pressing in on all sides until there was nowhere to go. Her vision blurred as the darkness closed in around her. The trees, the shadows, the very air itself seemed to fold in on her, smothering her in a cold, suffocating embrace. She gasped for breath, her heart hammering in her chest, and then the ground gave way beneath her feet. Olivia tumbled, the earth giving way as the ground beneath her crumbled. Her body fell, crashing through a hidden passage, the world spinning around her in a dizzying blur. She didn't know how far she had fallen, but the air grew colder with each passing second. Her limbs ached from the impact, and her head throbbed, but she fought to stay conscious. She landed with a sickening thud, a burst of pain shooting through her body as she lay still for a moment, gasping for air. Slowly, she pushed herself upright, her hands trembling as she gripped the cold, damp ground beneath her. The darkness was thick here, suffocating. The only sound was the distant, hollow whisper of the wind through unseen caverns. Olivia's eyes adjusted, and she realized she was no longer in the forest. She was somewhere else, a place beneath the earth, a place forgotten by time. The walls around her were made of black stone, slick with moisture, jagged and sharp. The air reeked of decay, and the ground beneath her feet was covered in an eerie, unnatural stillness. It felt like the very essence of the forest had shifted here, like it had found a new domain beneath the surface, a sanctuary for its ancient power. She stood, her legs unsteady, and took a cautious step forward. Every instinct told her to run, to turn back, but she couldn't. She didn't know what she was running from anymore. The forest had already consumed so much of her. What was one more step? A soft, haunting whisper filled the air, this time clearer than before. "You are close now," it said, the voice laced with malevolence. "Closer to the heart." "The heart," Olivia murmured, her throat dry as dust. "What heart?" "The heart of the forest. The source. The place where all things are born. And all things die." A chill ran down her spine. She had heard rumors, stories passed down through the generations, of a place deep within the forest, a place where the curse had first begun, where the forest power had originated. The heart, the very core of the malevolent force that had destroyed everything. This place, this, hollow, it was the source. Olivia's pulse quickened. If this was the heart of the forest, then this was where it had all begun. This was where she could end it, where she could finally destroy it or be destroyed by it. A sound echoed from deeper within the hollow. Something moving, something approaching. Olivia's body tensed as she stepped back, heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't alone. Something was coming. From the shadows, a figure emerged, its form obscured by the darkness, but its presence unmistakable. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she stepped back, fear tightening around her chest. The figure stepped closer, revealing itself as a shadowy silhouette, its form indistinct, but the power it exuded was undeniable. It wasn't human, not in any sense Olivia recognized. It was a creature of the forest, born from the very essence of it. Its body was a grotesque fusion of flesh, bark, and shadow, its eyes glowing with the same sickly green light that had overtaken Mia and the others. Olivia stumbled backward, her mind racing. The truth of the forest, of the curse, was becoming clear. This thing, it wasn't a spirit or a demon. It was the forest's true form. The heart. "You," Olivia gasped, her voice trembling. "You're the forest." The creature tilted its head, its expression unreadable, before it spoke in a voice that resonated deep within Olivia's chest, as if it came from the earth itself. "I am the beginning and the end. I am what you sought to destroy. I am what you were destined to become." Olivia's stomach churned as the weight of its words sank in. She had never understood the full extent of the curse, never known the truth of what it wanted. But now, standing before the heart of the forest, she could feel it, the terrible, overwhelming truth. "I never wanted this," Olivia whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I just wanted to survive." The creature's laughter echoed around her, hollow and deep. "You never had a choice, Olivia. You were always meant to be part of me. All of you were." Olivia's vision blurred as the darkness closed in again. The forest had already won. The heart of the forest loomed before Olivia, its presence suffocating, oppressive. The dark, twisting shape of the creature that stood before her was the embodiment of everything she feared, an ancient force of nature that had existed long before humanity and would likely endure long after. She could feel its pull, an insidious magnetism that threatened to tear her apart. But she wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. Her knees shook, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of the creature's power. The cold air felt like needles against her skin, and her breath hitched in her throat. But somewhere deep inside her, a spark of resistance still burned. She refused to let the forest claim her, refused to allow it to swallow her soul and her humanity. "I won't be a part of you," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "I'll never join you." The creature's twisted form shuddered, its countless limbs shifting like branches caught in an unnatural wind. Its eyes, those sickly, glowing eyes, watched her, unreadable, ancient, yet somehow filled with amusement. It stepped closer, its voice like the rumble of thunder. "You think you can resist me, child?" The forest's heart crooned. "You think you have the strength to fight your fate?" Olivia's fingers tightened into fists. Her pulse raced, her mind desperate for some way, any way, to stop the inevitable. The creature's laughter echoed in her ears, a sound as hollow as the earth beneath her feet. "You are already mine," it whispered, its voice caressing her mind, pulling at her thoughts like strings on a puppet. "The moment you stepped into this forest, you became a part of the cycle. You are no different from the others." The words rang like a death knell in her mind, but Olivia refused to let them break her. She was not like the others. She couldn't be. She hadn't given in. Not yet. "You can't have me," she spat, her voice growing stronger despite the suffocating weight of the forest's presence. "I'm not yours to take." The creature's eyes narrowed, its glowing gaze narrowing into something akin to a sneer. "You think your resistance matters? You think you can fight what is in your blood?" Olivia's heart raced as a flood of memories hit her, each one like a wave crashing against her mind. Her mother's warnings, the stories about the cursed forest, the strange events that had led her and her friends into this nightmare. Mia's plea for help, every moment, every clue that had brought her here, into the very heart of the forest, seemed to converge in this moment. A realization struck her like a bolt of lightning, sudden and sharp. The forest's curse, it didn't start here. It didn't begin with them. It started much earlier. Before Mia, before her, before any of them. This had been going on for generations, and the forest's true power had been hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone like her to stumble across it. But what if that was the answer? What if the forest's curse, its power, could be turned against itself? Her mind raced as she pieced the fragments of the truth together. She had felt the energy of the forest, the way it coursed through her. But what if she could use it? Not as a tool for its control, but as a weapon against it? Without fully understanding how or why, Olivia took a step forward, her resolve solidifying like iron in her chest. She focused on the energy flowing through her, on the dark, pulsing force that she had felt ever since she'd first entered the forest. It wasn't just something that had infected her, it was part of her now. It had woven itself into her very being, her blood, her thoughts. Her fingers tingled as she stretched her hands toward the creature, reaching out as though she could somehow channel the forest's power. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sudden, explosive pulse of energy shot through her, as if the forest itself had been waiting for this moment. The dark force surged within her like a storm, swirling with power, wild, untamed. It tore through her mind, a rush of images and voices, the voices of the forest. "Join us. You are ours. We are one." She fought back against the tide of their influence, focusing her mind, willing herself to control the power rather than succumb to it. "No!" Olivia cried out, her voice hoarse. "I won't let you win." In that moment, something shifted within her. It wasn't just the power of the forest. It was her will, her humanity. She focused on it, drawing every ounce of resistance she could muster, and in doing so, she forced the power to bend to her will. The ground beneath her feet trembled as the forest's energy surged outward, like a shockwave, crashing against the heart of the forest. The creature screamed in fury, its twisted form writhing, cracking, as if the very foundation of its existence was breaking apart. Olivia's breath was ragged as she fought to maintain control, her body straining against the immense force she had unleashed. The dark power pressed against her, clawing at her mind, threatening to break her, but she held firm. She focused on the heart of the forest, the source of the strength. I'm not a part of you, she shouted, her voice breaking with the intensity of her struggle. I am not your vessel. With one final cry, Olivia pushed herself forward, thrusting her hands toward the creature, the power in her body exploding outward in a brilliant, blinding wave. The forest screamed in agony. The world seemed to explode around Olivia, the ground shaking violently beneath her feet. The walls of the hollow cracked, splitting apart as the force of her attack tore through the earth. The creature before her howled in fury, its form distorting, writhing in the wake of her power. The dark energy that had once seemed so impenetrable began to unravel, its grip loosening as the forest's heart began to break apart. Olivia's heart raced as the air grew thick with the smell of burning leaves and earth. The ground split open, revealing the depths of the forest's ancient heart, a core of rotting wood and glowing, sickly energy. The darkness that had once controlled her was now starting to crumble. But as the creature collapsed in on itself, a new voice rose from the chaos, louder than the rest, cutting through the storm of destruction. You can't destroy what's already inside you, Olivia. It was Mia's voice, clear and pained, echoing through the forest. Olivia turned, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. Mia's form appeared in the haze, her figure broken, torn, but still there, still fighting. You don't have to do this, Mia whispered, though her voice was weak. Please don't make the same mistake I did. Olivia's heart sank. She had come so far, but could she truly escape what had already taken root inside her? The forest's last breath echoed as the earth trembled, and Olivia knew it was now or never. Would she be able to escape? Would she find a way to truly defeat the forest? Or would she become a part of it forever? Mia's voice still lingered in the air, soft but insistent, like a prayer whispered through the wind. Olivia turned to face her, her heart beating in a frantic rhythm, not sure if what she was seeing was real or just another part of the curse. Mia, Olivia's voice wavered as she stepped toward her, but Mia's figure seemed to flicker, dissolving and reforming in a twisted blur of shadow and light. Olivia, Mia's voice cracked with pain, but there was no mistaking the urgency in it. Don't let it consume you. It doesn't just want your body. It wants your soul. It's already inside you. You can't fight it forever. Olivia's mind spun, the words cutting through her like shards of glass. She felt that darkness inside her, the suffocating power, the pull of the forest. It was like a river running through her veins, an ancient current of life and death that threatened to drown her. She had resisted for so long, fought so hard against the inevitable, but Mia's words felt true. Could it be that she was already lost? You're wrong, Olivia said, though her voice trembled. I'm not like you. I haven't given in. I won't let it take me. Mia's eyes, once filled with life and hope, now seemed haunted, empty. She took a slow step forward, her hands reaching out with a desperate gesture. You don't understand. The forest is not something you can fight. It's a force, a necessity. It's been here long before you and I were born. It's connected to everything, to the land, to the sky. It feeds on us, and we feed on it. It's always been part of us, always. The moment you came here, you became part of it too. The words hit Olivia like a wave, crashing over her, pulling her down, suffocating her. It was true. She could feel the forest's energy within her, coiling around her like a vine, its roots burrowing deeper into her soul with every passing moment. No matter how hard she fought, she could feel it taking hold. But she wasn't ready to give in. She couldn't be. The creature, the heart of the forest, was writhing in agony as her power continued to crack its form apart. Its screeches echoed through the hollow, a sound of pure fury and desperation. But Olivia could feel it. Something more was stirring beneath the surface. The true horror of the forest, the ultimate force, was trying to reclaim its hold on her. Mia's figure flickered again, her voice like a whisper lost in the chaos. "You need to choose," Mia said, the words laced with sorrow. "Either you accept it, become one with it, and the forest will spare you, will let you live. Or you fight it, and the forest will tear you apart. You can't outrun it forever." But I didn't fight it enough. I let it win, and now it wants you, Olivia. It's too late. For a moment, the weight of the decision, the crushing gravity of her situation, seemed to settle in. The forest had been patient, had waited for her to come to it, to succumb to its call. It had been inside her from the beginning, buried in her blood, in the very essence of who she was. There was no running from it, no fighting it. The truth of it clawed at her chest. If she accepted it, perhaps she could find peace. Maybe she would become part of the forest, a part of something eternal. Maybe the pain, the fear would end. But deep within her, Olivia felt something stir, something more than the forest's power. It was a flicker of humanity, a glimmer of defiance. She couldn't give up. She couldn't let the forest win. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. The hollow around them twisted and groaned as if the very bones of the earth were cracking open, struggling to contain the force that had been unleashed. The walls seemed to pulse with dark energy as the heart of the forest roared in fury, sending out shockwaves of pure, malevolent power. "You can't escape me," the creature screamed, its voice deafening, shaking the air itself. "I am everything. I am your past, your future. You are mine, Olivia." Olivia's chest tightened as she stumbled backward, her eyes darting around in a panic. The darkness was rising, flooding the hollow, wrapping itself around her in tendrils of shadow and despair. Mia's voice was fading, drowned out by the roar of the forest's heart. The choice. Her vision blurred as the shadows reached for her, creeping up her legs, crawling into her mind. The forest's power was a siren call, inviting her to succumb to it, to accept the inevitability of her fate. She could feel the thrum of ancient magic vibrating in her bones. The hunger was overwhelming, as if the forest was willing to devour her whole. Her breath caught in her throat as her mind screamed, "No, I will not be consumed." In one final act of will, Olivia closed her eyes, feeling the rush of energy flooding her body. She could feel it, the power of the forest, raw and untamed, coursing through her veins, threatening to tear her apart. But she didn't let it control her. She fought against it, against the very essence of the forest's dark grip. "I am not your servant." With every ounce of strength she had left, Olivia reached inside herself, tapping into the very core of her will. She focused on that spark, that faint ember of resistance that had carried her this far. She didn't want to become the forest. She didn't want to surrender. She wanted to be free. Her hands shot out, palms open, as if she were pushing against a wall of dark energy. She felt the force trying to bend her, to crush her. But she held her ground. And then, with a single word, she spoke the incantation that had been whispered to her on the wind, a word she had only half understood until now. Enough! The earth cracked open beneath her, the hollow groaning as it seemed to resist, but Olivia pushed. The world around her seemed to tremble, as though the very foundations of the forest were breaking apart. The forest screamed, its voice echoing into the abyss. She didn't know how long she had been unconscious, or what had happened in the moments after she had unleashed the final force against the heart of the forest. But now, as she slowly opened her eyes, She found herself lying in the clearing where the forest had once loomed, its oppressive weight gone. The sun was rising, casting pale light through the trees. The air was still peaceful, and the forest was no longer there. It had vanished, dissipated like smoke on the wind. Olivia sat up, her body sore, her mind reeling. She glanced around, unsure if the world she was seeing was real. The forest had been destroyed, eradicated, but what had it left behind? What was the cost of the battle she had just fought? And more importantly, was she truly free? She didn't know, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of peace, of a new beginning. The curse had ended, and the forest had been silenced. And though Olivia wasn't sure what the future held, one thing was certain. She had survived. Olivia stood slowly, her legs shaky, but her resolve stronger than ever. The forest had disappeared, as though it had never been there at all. The twisted trees that had once whispered in the dark, the oppressive shadows that had threatened to consume her, were gone. In their place, there was only the lingering echo of something ancient, something that had been disturbed but not entirely vanquished. She reached out a hand, touching the soft earth beneath her, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin for the first time in what felt like forever. The forest, though silent, still seemed to watch her. A part of it remained somewhere deep in her mind, in her bones. But that, Olivia thought, was the true victory. She hadn't let it consume her. She hadn't given in. As she took her first steps out of the clearing, she glanced around. The sky was clear, the air fresh and crisp. The chill that had once plagued her body seemed to have lifted, replaced by a sense of quiet calm, as if the world was holding its breath. But the forest was no longer alive with menace. It had been purged, and in that stillness, Olivia could finally breathe. Olivia. The voice was soft, but unmistakable. She froze. "Mia," she called out, turning quickly. Her heart beat faster as she scanned the clearing. Ugh. Olivia. There it was again, but this time it came from within her mind. The voice, faint but persistent, echoed like a whisper in the back of her thoughts. Olivia swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She had defeated the forest, hadn't she? The curse was broken, the heart of the forest destroyed. Yet here was Mia's voice, slipping through the cracks of her consciousness, a reminder of the cost of victory. Mia, who had fallen to the darkness, who had succumbed to the forest's pull. Mia was no longer here. She was part of the forest now, a lost soul woven into the ancient roots. "I didn't want you to be like me," Mia's voice whispered, her tone filled with regret. "You don't have to carry the burden of this place, Olivia. Let it go. Let me go." That stretched beyond what Olivia could understand. But still the voice came. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the sound. She had let go, hadn't she? She had fought the darkness, the power of the forest, with everything she had. She had saved herself. But Mia was right. There was a weight that hung over her, one she couldn't shake. The forest might be gone, but its shadow still lingered in her heart. I don't know how to let go," Olivia whispered to the wind. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. And then, as if in answer, the wind shifted, gently, reassuringly. The trees around her, though they stood as quiet sentinels now, seemed to embrace her rather than watch her. The silence no longer felt suffocating. It was the calm after a storm. And for the first time, Olivia realized something. She wasn't running anymore. The curse was no longer an external force, a looming monster in the shadows. It was part of her. And though it was dark, though it was heavy, it was also something she could carry. She was stronger now. "I'll carry it, Mia," Olivia said softly, her voice steady, her eyes clear. "But I won't let it control me." The voice of her friend whispered once more, this time with a sense of peace. "You never were meant to be like me." And then, as if the last remnants of the forest had finally accepted her resolve, the voice faded into nothingness. The wind fell silent. Olivia stood alone, but she wasn't lost. She wasn't broken. She was free. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting its warm light over the landscape. The world was still. The nightmare that had once been the forest was over. And though Olivia knew there would be moments when the darkness inside her would stir, she had learned something vital. She could choose what she let define her. As she made her way toward the edge of the now-forgotten forest, she paused. Behind her, the land was peaceful. The trees, the shadows, all of it seemed untouched by the horrors that had unfolded here. The creatures, the voices, the terrible, ancient hunger, it was all gone. But somewhere deep in her, the memory would linger forever, a reminder of the battle she had fought and the strength she had found in herself. She would live, and no matter how dark the world became, she would never let it consume her again. Weeks passed, and life began to return to normal in the small town near the forest's edge. Olivia still carried the weight of what had happened, but it no longer felt like a burden. She returned to her life, to the people who had once known her, though she was forever changed. Her friends, too, had moved on. Mia's family had held a small memorial for her, but they never knew the truth of what had happened in the forest. And Olivia knew it was better that way. The town continued to thrive, unaware of the darkness that had once nearly consumed them all. The forest, in all its twisted grandeur, had been erased from the world, leaving no trace of the terror it had once wielded. But for Olivia, there would always be a part of it with her, a reminder of the strength it took to survive. She sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars as they twinkled softly in the sky. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, but it was no longer a foreboding sound. It was peaceful, like a lullaby. She closed her eyes, feeling the world breathe around her. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia allowed herself to rest. The curse was broken, and she was free. The days drifted into weeks, and with each passing moment, Olivia felt herself healing, though she knew the scars of her past would always be there. The weight of the forest, the darkness that had almost consumed her, was now just a whisper in the back of her mind. It was no longer something that defined her, but rather a chapter in her life that she had survived. She had taken to walking through the fields near her home, where the land seemed to stretch endlessly under the wide, open sky. There were no more shadows, no more whispers. The air was clear, and the earth beneath her feet felt solid, unyielding in a way that had once seemed foreign. She had learned how to trust it again. Her friends, too, had begun to heal. Mia's memory was a bittersweet ache that lingered in Olivia's heart, but she carried it with reverence now. She knew Mia had given her the strength to fight back, and for that, she would always be grateful. The guilt of Mia's sacrifice no longer haunted her. Olivia had accepted that some things were beyond control, and sometimes the only thing left to do was to keep moving forward. One afternoon, as Olivia sat by the small creek near her home, dipping her fingers into the cool water, she felt a shift. It was a subtle sensation, a prickling at the back of her neck, like the forest was still watching her. But it didn't feel threatening. It didn't feel suffocating. No, this was different. This was peaceful. The breeze tugged at her hair, and she looked up to see a figure standing at the edge of the creek. Her heart skipped a beat, and she almost didn't believe her eyes. "Mia," she whispered, the sound barely more than a breath. The figure smiled softly, her face radiant in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. It was Mia, but not in the way she had been before. There was no darkness in her eyes now, no sadness or longing. Just calm, like the still waters of the creek, serene and peaceful. "Mia," Olivia said again, standing to her feet. The smile on Mia's face widened, and she stepped closer, her form seeming to shimmer in the fading light. "I'm at peace now," Mia said, her voice no longer filled with the desperation it had held before. It was light, full of warmth. "The forest is no longer a part of me. I'm free, Olivia, and so are you." Olivia's throat tightened, her eyes stinging as she fought to hold back the tears. It was as if Mia had finally found what she needed, what they both needed: closure. The forest hadn't taken everything from them. They had won. "I thought I'd lost you forever," Olivia said, her voice choked with emotion. Mia reached out, her hand gently brushing Olivia's. There was no weight to her touch now, no pull, just the softness of a memory of a friend. "You never lost me," Mia replied. "Not really. I'm still here in you, in your strength, in your courage. You carried me when I couldn't carry myself." A quiet peace settled over Olivia as she looked at her friend. She realized then that the forest had never been just an enemy to defeat. It had been a trial, a test of their will, their spirits. And they had both emerged from it stronger, more alive than ever before. As Mia's figure began to fade, becoming part of the light, Olivia smiled, finally at peace. "I won't forget you," she said, her voice filled with a calm finality. "I know," Mia's voice echoed softly. "You never will." And then, just like that, Mia was gone, her presence fading into the wind. But Olivia didn't feel a sense of loss. Instead, she felt something far more profound: acceptance. The wind whispered through the trees, but now it was gentle, a soft lullaby rather than a howl of darkness. The forest, the land, had been healed. The curse was no more. And in its place was something new, something good. Olivia stood at the creek's edge, watching the water flow by, her reflection a calm, steady presence in the ripples. She was no longer running from her past, no longer haunted by the shadows. She was free, and the world ahead, though uncertain, no longer seemed as dark as it once had. Years passed. The town near the edge of the forest had long since forgotten the horrors that had once plagued it. The forest, too, had changed. It had returned to a quiet, natural state, no longer tainted by the curse that had once thrived within its roots. The whispers had ceased, the shadows had lifted. What had once been a place of fear had become a sanctuary. Olivia had rebuilt her life. She found peace in the quiet moments, watching the sun set over the fields, walking through the town without fear, speaking with the townsfolk who had no idea of the darkness that had once threatened them all. She had built new friendships, new bonds, but she never forgot the lessons she had learned from the forest. And sometimes, when the wind rustled the leaves just right, Olivia would stop and listen, a soft smile playing on her lips. It was a whisper, barely audible, but one that spoke of love, of friendship, and of the strength to overcome. Mia's voice. And this time, it was filled with nothing but peace. As Olivia looked toward the horizon, she knew that the forest, both the land and the memories, was behind her. She had survived, she had risen, and she would always be free. Olivia had almost forgotten what it was like to feel truly at peace. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt natural, unhurried. The town, the small patch of earth she had once been so afraid to approach, had become home. She grew closer with the people who had watched her change from the girl who fled the forest into the woman who stood tall in its aftermath. The days turned into seasons, and the seasons turned into years, each one a reminder that the darkness behind her had been conquered. But peace, Olivia learned, was fleeting. It came in waves, soft like the ebbing tide, but sometimes the tide pulled back with more force than expected. It was early autumn when it started again. She was sitting on her porch one evening, sipping a cup of tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. The light was golden, warm, and familiar. Everything felt as it should be. But then, as the twilight settled in, something else settled with it. The air grew heavier, the wind colder. For a moment, Olivia thought it was nothing, just the passing of the seasons, the shifting of nature. But then she heard it, a low hum, distant but unmistakable, as if the earth itself were vibrating. Her heart skipped a beat. The wind began to rise, rustling the trees in a way that was almost familiar. It wasn't the peaceful breeze she had grown used to. This wind was heavier, charged with an energy she hadn't felt in years. A dark, pulsing current began to curl through the branches. Olivia stood abruptly, her pulse quickening. She didn't need to look at the horizon to know where the sensation was coming from. The forest. She hadn't heard that hum in so long. The sound of the earth shifting, the quiet tremors that signaled the return of something she had thought was gone for good. The creature, the heart of the forest, had been vanquished, but had it truly been defeated? Had it been eradicated entirely, or had she simply suppressed it? Her breath caught in her throat as she watched the sky darken. The same unnatural chill filled the air, and the familiar whisper of the wind began to speak once more. It wasn't over. The forest hadn't just disappeared, it had waited. Like a predator lying in wait, it had only needed time to gather strength, to reclaim what it had lost. And now it was reaching out, stretching across the land, as if calling her back to it. Olivia didn't know how long she had stood there, staring into the depths of the trees, before she snapped back into action. She had to know what was happening. Her heart was pounding, her feet moving before she even fully registered the urgency. She grabbed a coat and a flashlight, not bothering to change out of her comfortable clothes. There was no time for anything else. She ran toward the forest, the hum growing louder with each step. The trees, those once benign figures, now loomed ominously at the edge of the town. The wind was biting, and the forest itself seemed to pulse in time with her racing heartbeat. It had returned. As she crossed the threshold of the forest, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The familiar feeling of being watched, being drawn into something far greater than herself, washed over her once again. But this time, there was a difference. The forest was darker, thicker, more suffocating. It seemed to swallow the light, even the beams of her flashlight. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was resisting her presence. Suddenly, the air shifted, and a shadow, no, a figure, appeared in front of her. A faint, translucent image flickering like a memory. It was Mia. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Mia," she whispered, but the figure didn't respond. It only flickered more intensely, its presence a dissonant echo of the past. The figure didn't approach her. It simply watched, its gaze intense but sad. "No," Olivia whispered, shaking her head. "No, not again. This isn't real." But Mia's presence didn't fade. It lingered, and in its wake, the darkness around her thickened. She could feel the pulse of the forest. The power, its hunger, hadn't gone away. It had simply been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to stir. Olivia's eyes darted around, her flashlight flickering as the ground trembled beneath her feet. Something ancient, something powerful, was beginning to wake. The hum reached a crescendo, a sound that vibrated through her very bones. It was the voice of the forest, the creature at its heart. "Olivia," it whispered, the words seeping into her mind. "You can never escape me." And this time, the voice wasn't just in her mind. It was in the very air, in the ground beneath her. The forest was alive again, alive and angry. The ground beneath her feet cracked, splitting open as dark tendrils shot up, wrapping around her legs, pulling her down. Olivia struggled, her heartbeat racing, as she desperately tried to break free. "No," she screamed, but the words were swallowed by the darkness. The tendrils pulled tighter, the force stronger than ever before. She could feel the forest trying to consume her, its power pulling her deeper into the earth, into its heart. And then, through the chaos, she heard it, Mia's voice, no longer a whisper, but a command. "Fight it," Mia said, her voice clear and strong in the midst of the growing storm. "Don't let it take you. Don't let it take anyone else." Olivia felt the truth in Mia's words. The forest hadn't been destroyed, it had only been delayed. And now, it wanted her back, wanted her to become its next vessel. But Mia had given her the strength to resist once before. and she could do it again. She gritted her teeth, summoning every ounce of strength, and willed herself to fight. She twisted her body, pulling against the tendrils, and with a fierce cry, she ripped herself free. The darkness recoiled, but it wasn't finished. It lashed out, thrashing around her, trying to drag her back into its grasp. But Olivia was done running. With a primal scream, she held her ground, focusing on the spark of light inside her, the piece of herself that had survived the forest's torment. Her heart, strong and defiant, became her weapon. "I will never be yours," she shouted into the darkness. And with that, the power of the forest shattered. The ground trembled, and the dark tendrils receded, retreating back into the earth. The oppressive weight of the forest lifted, and the air became still once more. But this time, Olivia didn't stop. She knew what she had to do. She had to finish this, once and for all. Olivia pushed forward, deeper into the heart of the forest, her steps no longer hesitant, but determined. She had broken reed before, but this time, she would make sure the forest would never return upon her end. As she reached the clearing where the heart of the forest had once pulsed with dark power, she saw it. The twisted remnants of what had been the dark, corrupted tree at its center, pulsing with sickly green light. It was withering, but not dead. Olivia raised her hand, feeling the energy crackle around her, and whispered the words that had been burned into her memory. Enough. A blinding light surged from her, radiating out like a shockwave. The tree screeched in agony as the light consumed it, its bark cracking and splintering as the dark energy was purged. And then, with one final, resounding crash, the forest fell silent. This time, Olivia knew it was truly over. She had freed herself, and this time, the forest would never return. The silence that followed was deafening. The air felt still, heavy with the weight of the moment. Olivia stood at the heart of the clearing, watching as the remnants of the twisted tree crumbled into dust, scattered by the breeze. The sickly green glow that had once emanated from its core was gone, replaced by the soft glow of the evening sun filtering through the trees. The land that had once been corrupted was now still, calm, and free from the ancient evil that had festered there. Olivia's chest heaved with exertion, her muscles sore, but there was a sense of profound release within her, a quiet peace. She hadn't just defeated the forest's darkness, she had broken it, erased it. Her body still buzzed with the energy of the battle, the remnants of the magic that had bound the forest to its will. But the magic was no longer malevolent. It was fading, dissolving like smoke, until it was nothing but a memory. The last vestiges of the forest curse were being swept away with the wind. Olivia. Her heart skipped a beat as the voice called her name. This time, there was no fear, no urgency, no desperation, just a soft, familiar whisper in the wind. She looked up, a smile pulling at the corners of her lips, even as the tears welled in her eyes. Mia stood there in the distance, bathed in the fading sunlight, her form gentle and serene. She wasn't a ghost, a flickering image, or a shadow anymore. She was whole. Her smile was peaceful, her eyes free of the sorrow that had once marked them. "Mia," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. Mia took a step forward, the breeze swirling around her, and her presence was as warm and comforting as the sunlight that bathed the clearing. "You did it," Mia said, her voice steady and calm. "You ended it." I couldn't have done it without you," Olivia replied, her throat tight as the truth settled into her heart. "I still couldn't do it without you." Mia's smile softened, and she shook her head. "You've always had the strength, Olivia. You just needed to believe in it." For a long moment, Olivia stood there, her heart full. She had finally realized what Mia had meant. This wasn't just about defeating the darkness of the forest. It was about facing the darkness inside herself. The fear, the grief, the guilt. And now, she had won. She had reclaimed her life. "I didn't want to lose you," Olivia said quietly, her voice full of the longing and love she had carried for so long. "I know," Mia said, her voice a soothing balm. "But you didn't. You carried me, Olivia. You've always carried me. And now, it's time for both of us to move on." Olivia wiped away a tear as Mia's figure began to fade, the light around her softening. "I won't forget you," Olivia promised, her voice firm. "I never will." Mia's figure shimmered, a final smile crossing her face. "I know," she whispered, and then she was gone, her presence lingering only in the stillness of the forest. The forest, though no longer alive with malice, felt different now. It was quiet, silent in the way that only nature could be. The trees stood tall, their branches reaching toward the sky in a peaceful embrace. The birds chirped in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of pine and earth. The darkness had been purged, but the forest itself was alive, whole, and free. Olivia stood there for what felt like an eternity, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. She could feel the weight of her journey lifting from her shoulders, the heaviness of fear finally fading away. It was over. The forest was no longer a curse, and neither was she. She was free. In the years that followed, Olivia became something of a legend in the town. The story of the forest's darkness and the girl who had fought back was told in whispers, passed down in stories that became more myth than reality. The town moved on. Life returned to its regular rhythms, and the scars of the past slowly faded. The forest, once feared and cursed, became a place of beauty, where families picnicked and children played. The darkness was gone, and it would never return. Olivia, though, never forgot. She would often walk along the edges of the forest, her steps slow, thoughtful. The memories of her battles, of the struggle, of Mia, would always linger in her mind. But they no longer haunted her. Instead, they served as a reminder of the strength it had taken to break free. She found peace in the small things now, in the sound of the wind through the trees, in the laughter of children playing in the distance, in the quiet moments at the end of a long day. The fear that had once consumed her was gone, replaced by something far stronger, a sense of serenity, a knowing that no matter what happened, she had the strength to face it. And when the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of purple and gold, Olivia would sit on her porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky. She would think of Mia, of the forest, and of everything she had lost and gained. But most of all, she would think of how far she had come. From the girl who had been swallowed by the forest to the woman who had broken its curse. She had reclaimed herself, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. It had been several years since Olivia had faced the horrors of the forest, and life in the town had flourished in ways she never imagined. She had established a small counseling practice, helping others in the community overcome their own struggles, though she often joked that the real reason was to ensure no one else would have to fight a battle like hers. She had created a life from the ashes of her pain, a life rooted in peace, but one always with a quiet sense of vigilance. But even in her tranquility, Olivia knew that darkness had a way of lingering, waiting for the right moment to rise. She couldn't erase the possibility entirely. Nothing in life was that simple, but she could stay vigilant. She could stand guard. One crisp autumn evening, while strolling through the now thriving forest that had returned to its peaceful state, Olivia noticed something peculiar. It had rained earlier that day, and the earth was soft beneath her boots. But as she wandered deeper into the woods, she felt the temperature drop abruptly. The air became thick, laden with a sense of weight she hadn't felt in years. A faint noise reached her ears, a faint rustling of branches. She stopped in her tracks, her breath caught in her chest. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now something felt wrong. The forest had always felt like home to her, even after the darkness. But now it felt like it was holding its breath. Olivia's mind immediately flashed back to that horrible moment when the forest had once again sought to consume her. She had broken its curse, but could it truly be over? Could she truly be free? She shook her head, trying to push the thought aside. It was foolishness. The forest had been purged, and for years it had remained calm. But the unease lingered. She couldn't ignore it. Then she saw it. At the edge of the clearing she had grown familiar with, just beyond the trees, something moved. A figure, shadowed indistinct, was there. Olivia's heart raced. "Mia," she whispered, her voice trembling, half in hope, half in fear. But no, this figure was too tall, its outline too ragged, too unfamiliar. It wasn't Mia. It was something else, something darker. The figure stepped forward, and with each movement, it seemed to flicker in and out of sight, as though it didn't entirely belong in the world of the living. The wind shifted once more, carrying with it a faint, echoing whisper. Olivia's pulse quickened as the words, barely perceptible, barely more than a breath, reached her ears. "You are not finished." Her eyes widened. The voice was not Mia's, nor was it any human voice she recognized. The forest, the thing within the trees, had returned, or perhaps it had never fully left. She could feel its power stirring, like an ancient beast awakening from slumber. The peace she had worked so hard to build now felt like a fragile illusion, ready to shatter. "You will never be free," the voice whispered again. Olivia's thoughts scrambled. No, she wouldn't let it take her again. She had faced the darkness once and won. She had the strength to face it again. But what was this new presence? What had been waiting, lying dormant all these years? The figure stepped forward once more, revealing a face. No, an absence of a face, just a shifting mass of shadows and echoes. And yet Olivia could sense its intelligence, its malevolent awareness. This was something different from the forest she had once fought. It was something older, something that had been there even before the curse, something that had always been in the shadows, even when the forest had been at peace. The creature's form flickered again, growing sharper, more defined, until the shape of a tall, humanoid figure stood before her. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a hollow space that seemed to consume the world around it. "You may have broken the forest's curse, Olivia," the creature intoned, its voice cold, as though the very air turned ice in its wake. "But you have not broken the source." Olivia's blood ran cold. The source? What did it mean? She gripped the small pendant around her neck, her last connection to Mia, and drew strength from it. No matter what this thing was, no matter how ancient or terrifying, she knew one thing. She had defeated darkness before, and she would not allow it to claim her life again. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the overwhelming fear that threatened to take hold. The creature shifted closer, its presence suffocating, yet it never quite touched her. There was an immense power radiating from it, yet Olivia felt a strange sense of control within her, the same way she had felt when she first faced the forest curse. "I am the root of the forest's power," it explained. "I am the ancient force that binds this land. You defeated the curse, yes, but curses are mere symptoms of what I am. You cannot rid the world of me. The forest is mine to control, and you are mine to consume." A sickening sense of inevitability washed over her, but she fought it. No, this wasn't happening. The wind picked up again, louder now, whipping through the trees like a storm on the horizon. The creature stepped forward, its shadow now almost completely enveloping her. "You will never be rid of the darkness," it said, its voice rising. "It is you, Olivia. It is us all." In that moment, Olivia understood. The forest had always been more than just a curse. It was a reflection of something much deeper, an ancient force that had always lived in the land. The forest had been merely the gateway, the vessel through which it exerted its power. And now, this creature, this being, had come to remind her of that fact. But Olivia knew something the creature didn't. She wasn't alone anymore. And the force inside her, the strength she had found in herself and Mia's memory, was far stronger than the shadows that tried to suffocate her. With a surge of determination, Olivia's mind connected with the earth beneath her. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she did not feel alone. She felt the pulse of the land, the very essence of the forest. But it wasn't an overwhelming tide. It was a part of her. She had become part of this land, and as long as she stood, this land would stand with her. The pendant around her neck glowed faintly, the faintest pulse of light, as if Mia were there once again, standing beside her. Olivia held that strength in her heart. "You're wrong," Olivia said, her voice clear. "You can't control me. Not anymore. The land belongs to those who choose it, who protect it, and I choose to protect it." With a cry that seemed to shake the very earth beneath her feet, Olivia thrust her hand toward the creature, channeling all the energy she had into one final act. Light, pure, brilliant light, shot out from her, brighter than the sun, illuminating everything around her, piercing the shadows. The creature screamed, but its form began to dissipate, its dark presence unraveling, disintegrating before her eyes. The trees groaned, but the darkness receded, collapsing inward, unable to hold its form any longer. The creature's whispers died away into nothingness, and in its place, silence once again reigned. Olivia collapsed to her knees, the energy draining from her. But as she sat there, she realized something profound. This time, the forest wasn't just a force to be battled. It was something she had come to understand, something she had learned to live with. And with that, the darkness that had followed her for so long was finally gone. For good. In the years that followed, Olivia found her place in the world. The town flourished, and the forest remained untouched, not as a curse, but as a living, breathing part of the land. And Olivia had found peace, not in the absence of darkness, but in the acceptance that light could exist, even in the shadow of what had once been. She never forgot the trials she had faced, but now she carried the wisdom of them with her. And as she walked through the woods, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, she felt something she had always longed for. Not just freedom, but a deep, enduring peace. The forest and its power were a part of her, but they no longer controlled her. She had embraced it, and in doing so, she had finally found her home. Life continued in the town, and the people went about their lives as if the terror of the past had been nothing but a distant nightmare. Olivia's counseling practice flourished, and she became a respected figure in the community, a woman who had faced unimaginable darkness and had triumphed. The forest, though it carried an ancient power, had become a place of peace, a symbol of growth and renewal. The whispers of the past seemed to fade into the winds, carried away with the changing seasons. Yet, no matter how peaceful things became, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting. It wasn't fear, no. That was something she had long since left behind. But there was a strange sensation she couldn't quite place. Every so often, when walking through the woods or standing on the edge of the clearing, she would feel it, a distant tremor, like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. A soft murmur in the breeze, barely audible, a sound she could never quite catch. It was fleeting, but it was enough to leave her wondering. One evening, as the town prepared for the annual harvest festival, Olivia found herself once again wandering the forest. The day had been spent with laughter, music, and the bustle of the festival preparations. But now, in the quiet of the evening, as the stars began to peek through the blanket of twilight, Olivia felt a pull toward the clearing. The place where she had faced the darkest part of herself, where Mia had stood by her side, where the battle had begun. She knew she had come here before, seeking solace, seeking answers. But tonight, something was different. She felt as if she were being drawn to the very heart of the forest, towards something that had always been there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to reveal itself. As she stepped into the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. The trees around her swayed in a breeze that didn't feel quite natural. The air was thick with something she couldn't identify, and once again, the temperature dropped. And then she saw it. The faintest flicker of light in the distance, like a firefly, hovering just beyond the edge of the trees. It was pale, faint, so faint it could have been mistaken for a trick of the eye. But Olivia knew better. This wasn't an illusion. It was something real. Her instincts flared, the sensation she had pushed aside for so long now rising to the forefront of her mind. The forest had always held something beneath its surface, a force that she hadn't quite understood, a presence that she had thought was gone. With a determined breath, Olivia stepped forward, her boots crunching softly against the fallen leaves. She followed the flickering light, her heart pounding in her chest. As she moved deeper into the woods, the light grew stronger, though it remained elusive, always just ahead of her. The forest seemed to shift around her, as though it were alive, watching her every move. She wasn't sure what she was following anymore, whether it was the light or the pull of something darker, something that she had yet to fully understand. She reached a small grove, and there, in the center, stood a figure. It was a woman, cloaked in shadow, her features obscured by the dim glow that surrounded her. She was tall, impossibly slender, and she stood with a grace that seemed both otherworldly and familiar. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as the figure turned toward her. "Mia," Olivia whispered, but the woman didn't respond, only watched her with eyes that gleamed with an unsettling depth. The figure stepped closer, and Olivia's heart raced. This was Mia, not entirely. There was something in the figure's presence that sent a cold shiver through her, something ancient and unknowable. "You are still here," Olivia said, her voice steady but thick with unease. "I thought you had." "I never left," the woman interrupted, her voice soft, yet echoing with a power that made Olivia's spine tingle. "You only think you banished the darkness, Olivia. But the darkness was never gone. It was merely waiting for you to understand it." The air seemed to grow heavier as the woman stepped closer, the glow around her flickering like a dying flame. Olivia could feel the pull, the same pull she had once felt when the forest had consumed her, when the curse had gripped her heart. "What are you?" Olivia demanded, stepping back, her gaze never leaving the woman's form. "You can't be Mia. You were my friend." The woman tilted her head slightly, a twisted smile curving on her lips. "I was once your friend, but the forest does not simply leave. It remains always hidden beneath the surface, and now it calls you back." The light around the woman dimmed even further, as if the world itself was being swallowed by the shadows. "You don't understand, do you, Olivia? The forest is you, and you are it." Olivia felt her pulse quicken. "No, I've defeated you. I've broken the curse." The woman laughed softly, a sound that sent an icy chill down Olivia's spine. "You think you have broken it. You think you have conquered the darkness. But the forest is not simply a curse. It is a part of the land, a part of your soul. You've only touched the surface. The real power is deeper than you ever imagined." Olivia's mind spun. She had faced the forest before, had fought its evil, and had triumphed. She had made peace with the darkness that had consumed her. But this was something different. Before she could speak again, the woman raised her hand, and the world around Olivia seemed to tremble. The trees groaned, their branches stretching toward her, their limbs twisting in ways that defied logic. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, and in the distance, she could hear a low, rumbling sound, like something ancient and powerful stirring beneath the earth. "The forest is awakening again," the woman whispered, her voice growing faint. "And you, Olivia, are its heart. You can never escape it. You can never leave it." With that, the woman's form began to fade into the darkness, leaving only the faintest trace of her presence behind. But Olivia could feel it, the pull. The forest was alive again, its ancient power stirring deep within the earth. And with that realization, Olivia understood. The forest had never truly been defeated. It was always there, within her and within the land. And the battle, it seemed, was far from over. Olivia stood alone in the darkened grove, the forest around her alive with an energy she couldn't understand. The coldness of the air pressed in on her, the trees groaning as if they, too, were awakening from a long slumber. She could feel it deep within her chest, a thudding pulse like a heartbeat, rhythmic and steady, calling to her. The forest isn't gone, she thought, her heart racing. It never left. She spun around, looking for the woman, the shadowed figure who had spoken of the forest's power, of its deep connection to her. She wasn't sure whether to be terrified or to understand. But one thing was clear. The battle she thought was over was only just beginning. As she moved cautiously through the grove, her mind racing, the shadows seemed to shift around her. The trees whispered in an ancient language she didn't know, their voices soft, but carrying an undeniable weight. It was as though they were speaking directly to her, urging her to listen. And then the forest spoke. "You are the guardian now. You are one with us." The voice echoed, not in her ears, but in her very bones, in the air that filled her lungs. It was overwhelming, all-consuming, and for a moment, Olivia felt the weight of the land pressing on her soul. The woman in the grove had been right. The forest had never been something to simply defeat. It was a living, breathing entity bound to the earth itself. And somehow, in her struggle to break free, she had become a part of it. The curse was never just a curse, the forest whispered. It was a trial, and you have passed it. But there is more, much more. Olivia's mind swirled with confusion. What did it mean? Was she its new ruler? Its keeper? Had she really been chosen to wield such power? "I don't understand," she whispered into the darkening woods. "What do you want from me?" The forest didn't respond with words, but instead, a deep, low rumble spread through the ground beneath her. The earth trembled beneath her boots as something powerful began to stir. "You are the key," the forest murmured. The heart. Olivia's heart stopped for a beat, and then she felt it, a pull, sharp and sudden, deep inside her chest. It was like a cord was tethered to her, pulling her towards something hidden beneath the earth. She stumbled forward, her feet moving on their own as if they were guided by the forest itself. The trees bent and parted, creating a path, a clearing that hadn't been there before. At its center was a large stone, cracked with age, but still radiating an eerie energy that seemed to hum in the air. It was surrounded by dark vines, black and twisting, their leaves gleaming with a sickly glow. The stone pulsed, matching the rhythm of Olivia's own heartbeat. She knew, in that moment, what this place was. The heart of the forest, the very source of its power, and it was calling to her. The pull became stronger, urging her closer, until she was standing at the base of the stone. The air around her thickened, crackling with raw energy. She felt her breath catch in her throat as she reached out, her hand hovering just above the stone. It seemed to hum beneath her fingertips, alive with the power of ages. "Touch it," the forest whispered. "You must understand." Without hesitation, Olivia laid her palm flat on the stone. The world exploded around her. The pulse of the stone flared to life, flooding her senses with a blinding light. Her body was flooded with energy, as though the forest itself was flowing through her veins. The connection was sudden and overwhelming, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She was drowning in the sheer weight of the power she had unleashed. And then the visions began. She saw the land before it had been touched by humans, before it had been corrupted. It was pristine, wild, untouched by time. The trees towered, their leaves shimmering with the purest light. The air was fresh, the earth rich with life. She felt the heartbeat of the land, the pulse of the forest, its connection to the stars, the sun, the moon. And then the darkness arrived. It was a shadow that crept from the depths, a force that sought to consume, to bend the forest to its will. It slithered beneath the earth, feeding on the life of the land, twisting the trees, corrupting them with its power. The forest fought back, But it was weakened, and the curse was born, an attempt to lock the darkness away, to contain it. But the darkness was not gone. It was simply sleeping, and now it has awakened, the forest's voice whispered. Olivia gasped for air as the visions faded, her body still trembling from the power coursing through her. She stumbled back, shaking, her head spinning. She could feel it now, the weight of the forest's ancient presence. She had always known the forest was alive, but now she knew this was something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. This was not just a forest. This was a living, breathing force, and she was connected to it, bound to it, whether she wanted to be or not. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the trees, and Olivia's heart clenched. She didn't need to look closely to know who it was. It was the woman, the shadowy figure who had spoken to her before. But now, her form was clearer, more defined. There was no longer any mistaking it. "I am not your enemy, Olivia," the woman said, her voice soft, but the weight of it pressed into Olivia's chest. "I am your guide. The forest has chosen you. You are its guardian now." Olivia backed away, her breath catching in her throat. "I didn't ask for this. I don't want this." The woman's expression softened, though there was an edge of something dark in her eyes. "You don't get to choose. The forest has always chosen its guardians. You are part of it now. You are the heart." Olivia felt her knees weaken. The weight of it all, this power, this responsibility was too much to bear. No, Olivia whispered, shaking her head. "I won't be its puppet. I won't let it control me." The woman's smile was bitter, her eyes filled with sorrow. "It's not about control, Olivia. It's about balance. The forest cannot survive without its heart, and neither can you. You were always meant for this. The darkness will rise again, but with you at the heart, you can control it. You can keep it contained." Olivia clenched her fists. She wasn't sure if she could trust this woman, or the forest, or any of it. She had already fought once to break free of the curse, to defeat the darkness. Could she truly be the one to keep it in check? And yet, deep down, she knew she had no choice. The forest had chosen her, and if she didn't accept her place, she would only be consumed by the darkness that had always waited in the shadows. With a heavy heart, Olivia nodded. "I'll do what needs to be done." The woman's expression softened, as if relieved. "You are stronger than you know. The forest is with you." And as the wind began to rise around them, Olivia felt a deep, unshakable truth settle within her. This was her life now. She was the heart of the forest, and the forest's heart was hers. The days following Olivia's connection with the forest passed in a haze. She could feel the power coursing through her at all times. Every leaf, every breeze, every inch of the land seemed to hum in tune with her heartbeat. The trees, now taller and more imposing in her mind's eye, seemed to whisper to her in the quiet moments. Sometimes it was gentle, like the rustling of the leaves, but other times it was heavy and unrelenting, a constant reminder that she had become something more than human. The vision she'd experienced in the clearing still lingered, vivid flashes that came to her unbidden during the night, interrupting her sleep. The ancient forest, untouched and pure, had been a paradise. But even then, it had been vulnerable. The darkness had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. The curse had been an attempt to protect the land, to trap the malevolent force that sought to destroy it. But now, with Olivia at its heart, the balance was shifting. The darkness wasn't just an old, forgotten entity. It was alive and waking. And the only way to keep it contained was for her to understand its true power. But how could she? How could she harness something so ancient and terrifying? Could she truly stand as the guardian, the heart of this living, breathing force? "Olivia," a voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Mia, standing by the edge of the forest, her figure silhouetted against the fading light of the late afternoon. Mia had been her closest friend, the one who had stood by her side when everything had seemed lost. And now, Olivia couldn't help but feel a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Mia didn't know the truth about what she had become. "Mia," Olivia said softly, her voice catching in her throat. Mia gave her a warm smile, though Olivia noticed the concern in her eyes. "You've been distant lately. Everything okay?" Olivia hesitated. She couldn't tell Mia the whole truth. She couldn't explain what had happened in the forest, the terrible power she now carried. She didn't even fully understand it herself. But Mia deserved to know something. I've been trying to understand what happened," Olivia said, her voice low. "The forest, the curse, everything. It's just overwhelming." Mia nodded, her brow furrowing. "I know. After everything that happened, I still can't believe it. But you're safe, Olivia. You broke the curse. The darkness is gone. You don't have to carry that weight anymore." Olivia forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I wish it were that simple." "Then what is it?" Mia asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "What's bothering you?" Olivia's gaze flickered toward the edge of the trees, her pulse quickening. She could feel it again, the presence that watched her from the depths of the forest. The pull of something ancient, something that was waiting for her to act. "I feel like there's something still out there," Olivia admitted quietly. "Something that's been buried. And I think it's waking up." Mia's expression shifted, the concern deepening in her eyes. "What do you mean? Are you saying the curse isn't really gone?" "I don't know," Olivia murmured. "I wish I could explain it, but it feels like the darkness is still in the land. It's been waiting for something or someone, and now that I'm connected to the forest, I can feel it." Mia took a step closer, her hand resting on Olivia's shoulder in a gesture of support. "You're not alone in this. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Olivia's heart swelled with gratitude. But deep down, she knew this wasn't something Mia could help with. This was something only she could face. And no matter how much Mia cared, no matter how much she wanted to stand by her side, Olivia couldn't drag her into the depths of the forest. "Not again." "Thank you, Mia," Olivia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I think this is something I have to face alone." Mia hesitated, but then nodded, understanding. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Promise me you won't let whatever's out there consume you. Don't let the forest control you." Olivia gave her a soft smile, though it was laced with uncertainty. "I won't. I promise." As Mia left, disappearing back into the warmth of the town, Olivia turned her gaze back to the forest. She knew, deep down, that her journey was far from over. The darkness was stirring, and she was the only one who could stop it from consuming everything. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. The pull of the forest was too strong, its whispering call echoing in her mind. She could feel it, like a weight pressing on her chest, urging her to return to the heart of it all, the stone, the ancient power beneath the earth. With a deep breath, she pulled on her jacket and stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars above were hidden behind thick clouds, and the moon seemed distant, as though it too was wary of the darkness that was rising. The forest was silent as she approached, but Olivia could feel it, the heartbeat of the land, faint but steady beneath her feet. The air was thick with anticipation. As she stepped into the clearing once more, the pulse of the stone called to her. She could sense its presence, and as her fingers brushed the cold surface, the connection flared to life. Visions rushed through her, flashes of the past, of the dark force that had twisted the trees, corrupted the land. But these images were different. They were clearer. They showed her something else, a presence, an entity that had been sealed deep beneath the earth, waiting for a moment of weakness. And now, that moment had come. The ground trembled beneath her, and Olivia's heart raced as the trees around her began to writhe, their limbs twisting unnaturally. The air turned thick with malevolent energy, and from the shadows, something began to emerge. It was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Olivia's body tensed, and the forest around her seemed to bend to the will of the darkness. It had been dormant for so long, but now it was awake, and it was coming for her. "You are the heart of the forest, Olivia," the voice echoed in her mind. "But you cannot contain us forever." She could feel the darkness rising, flooding her senses, twisting the earth beneath her. The power was immense, overwhelming. It was as if the very land itself was fighting against her, its heartbeat no longer in sync with hers. But Olivia couldn't falter. She was the guardian now. She was the heart. With a deep breath, she steadied herself and called upon the power of the forest, the ancient power that flowed through her veins. She was no longer just a woman. She was the forest itself, and she would fight to protect it. The ground beneath Olivia trembled violently, the earth buckling as though something monstrous was pushing against it. The trees around her moaned and creaked, their branches contorting in unnatural angles, swaying as if in response to the unseen force rising from deep within the earth. The power of the darkness had awakened, and it was trying to break free. Olivia's breath hitched in her throat as the air thickened, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Her heart raced as she stood at the center of the clearing, her hands still resting on the stone. She could feel the vibrations of the earth through her fingertips, the tremors, reverberating through her very bones. The forest was alive, but it was in pain, screaming out in agony as the darkness sought to reclaim what it had once lost. "This is the battle you were born for," the forest whispered to her, its voice a soft hum that blended with the chaos around her. "You must stop it, Olivia. You are the heart. You must fight." But Olivia felt a surge of doubt. Was she truly strong enough to face this? Was she capable of standing against a force that had been lying dormant for so long, waiting for the right moment to rise again? Her vision blurred as the ground before her split open with a deafening crack. A dark mist began to pour from the fissure, swirling in the air like a tangible entity, seeping into the clearing with a sickly, oily sheen. It carried with it a coldness that burned, a chill that reached into her very soul. She felt it. This was no longer just a curse. It was a presence, an ancient, malevolent force that sought to tear everything apart. The darkness shifted, and from within it emerged a figure, a towering shape, a silhouette of shadows and twisted branches, its eyes glowing with a cruel, fiery light. It was not human. It was something older, something beyond understanding. A low, guttural voice filled the air, dark and rumbling. "The heart cannot protect you, Olivia. You are nothing but a vessel, a puppet bound by the will of the forest. You cannot control me. I am eternal." The words clawed at Olivia's mind, trying to break her, to make her doubt the connection she had forged with the forest. But she couldn't let it. She was the heart. She was the guardian. She had to fight. With a deep breath, Olivia focused, closing her eyes for a moment. The pulse of the forest still echoed within her, steady and strong. She reached into it, reaching for the power that was now a part of her. She felt the roots of the trees beneath the ground, the ancient power that had once protected the land. She was not just a human. She was a conduit, a living link between the earth and the sky, the dark and the light. The darkness twisted, its form pulsing with fury as it surged forward, its shadowy tendrils reaching out toward Olivia. It sought to consume her, to drown her in its cold, suffocating grip. But Olivia would not let it. With a cry, she lifted her hands, and the forest responded. The trees around her groaned and cracked, their branches stretching and twisting into a barrier of bark and leaves. The ground beneath her feet split open, releasing tendrils of glowing roots that coiled around the darkness, pulling it back, trapping it within the earth. The figure in the mist howled in rage, its fiery eyes burning bright as it struggled against the restraints. "You cannot contain me, little heart," it spat. "You are nothing but a fleeting moment in the eternity of the forest. I have been here since time began, and I will rise again." The air crackled with tension as Olivia stepped forward, her heart racing, her body filled with an energy she couldn't fully comprehend. She wasn't just fighting for her life now. She was fighting for the very soul of the land, for the balance that had been shattered when the darkness first came to be. With a scream, Olivia released all the power she had drawn from the forest. The roots surged outward, their glow bright enough to push back the shadows, to drive them deep into the earth. She felt the darkness pulling at her, tugging at her very essence, but she resisted. She was the heart. She was the pulse of this place, and she would not allow it to be destroyed. The figure writhed and screamed, its form flickering as the roots tightened around it. For a moment, it seemed as though the darkness might win, that the force would break free and consume everything. But Olivia's will held firm. She could feel the earth beneath her feet, the power of the forest flowing through her veins. She was connected to this place, and this place would not fall. "You are not eternal," Olivia said, her voice steady, filled with the strength of the forest itself. "You are a shadow, and shadows can be banished." With those words, she pressed her palm flat against the stone at the center of the clearing. The pulse of the forest surged once more, and with it, the dark figure let out a final, bone-chilling scream. The ground beneath it cracked wide open, swallowing the creature into the earth, burying it deep within the soil where it could not escape. For a long moment, the clearing was still. The wind was quiet, and the trees no longer groaned in pain. The air, once thick with the suffocating presence of the darkness, seemed to breathe again. The forest, while scarred, had been saved. For now, Olivia stood, panting, her body trembling from the sheer force of the battle. The stone beneath her hand was warm now, its pulse steady and strong. She could feel it still, its connection to her. She was the heart of the forest. She had been chosen for this. And for better or worse, this was her destiny. But even as she stood victorious, she knew the truth. The darkness might have been contained, but it had not been vanquished. It was still there beneath the surface, waiting. The battle would never truly end. Not as long as she remained the heart of the forest. And the forest itself was not finished with her yet. The calm after the battle felt hollow, like the silence that follows a thunderstorm, heavy and oppressive. Olivia stood alone in the clearing, her breath ragged and uneven, her skin still buzzing with the power she had unleashed. The stone beneath her hand was warm, but it seemed to throb with a rhythmic pulse, almost as if it were alive. And yet, despite the victory, Olivia felt a growing unease in the pit of her stomach. The darkness had been contained, for now, but deep within her, she knew it wasn't truly gone. It was still out there, still waiting for the right moment to rise again. And as much as the forest had helped her, it couldn't fight the darkness forever. It needed her to stand guard, to keep it sealed. But could she do that? Could she truly carry the weight of the forest on her shoulders without it consuming her too? The wind picked up, rustling the leaves around her, a faint whisper brushing against her ear. The voice of the forest, soft and familiar. "It is not over, Olivia. The darkness will return, but you are the key. You can control it." Olivia clenched her fists at her sides. She could feel the forest calling to her, urging her to embrace the power that flowed through her. The connection was undeniable, but the more she gave into it, the more she feared losing herself in the process. "I don't know if I can do this," she murmured to the wind. "I don't know if I can keep it at bay." The breeze shifted, swirling around her, as if the trees themselves were comforting her. "You are stronger than you realize. You are the forest's heartbeat. You will not lose yourself. Not unless you stop listening." Olivia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle within her. The forest had never steered her wrong before. It had been with her every step of the way, guiding her, urging her forward. But that was the part that terrified her, the way it seemed to consume her, pulling her deeper into its embrace with every passing day. She could feel the connection now, strong as ever. the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the roots stretching far and wide, intertwining with her very being. She was bound to this land, and it was bound to her. But the darkness was something different. With a final, shaky breath, Olivia turned away from the clearing. She couldn't linger here, not now. The forest had been saved for the moment, but she needed to understand more. She needed answers, and she had to find them before it was too late. Back in the town, the weight of the events that had unfolded seemed to have already faded from most people's minds. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, and the villagers had returned to their routines. But Olivia knew the truth. The darkness was not gone. It would never be gone, and it was only a matter of time before it began to stir again. Mia was waiting for her by the old mill when Olivia arrived, her expression a mix of worry and curiosity. She had noticed the change in Olivia ever since that first encounter with the forest. She had seen the way her friend had become more distant, more withdrawn, and now she couldn't ignore the weight in Olivia's eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mia said softly, her eyes searching Olivia's face. Olivia shook her head, offering a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No ghosts, just a lot to think about." Mia crossed her arms, leaning against the stone wall of the mill. "I can tell something's bothering you. I know you haven't been the same since everything with the forest. You've been quiet, distant. Is it the curse? The darkness?" Olivia hesitated. She couldn't tell Mia the whole truth. Not yet. The forest had been kind to her, but it had also given her a heavy burden. She couldn't share that burden with her friend. Not when Mia had already been through so much. "I'm just trying to understand everything that's happened," Olivia said, forcing her voice to sound calm. "I thought the curse was broken. I thought the darkness was gone. But it's not that simple." Mia's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The curse was lifted. The forest is free now. You told me that yourself." "I thought I could control it," Olivia admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But I was wrong. The darkness is still there. It's still out there, waiting, and I'm the one who has to keep it sealed." Mia's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, you mean the curse isn't really over? You're still tied to the forest?" Olivia nodded grimly. "I'm not just tied to it. I am the forest's heart now. I'm the one holding the darkness back. But I'm starting to wonder if I can do this. If I can keep it under control without letting it consume me." Mia's face softened with sympathy, and she stepped closer, resting a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "You're not alone, you know. You never have been. Whatever this is, you don't have to face it by yourself. I'll help you. I'll stand by you." Olivia felt a pang of guilt, but she pushed it aside. Mia couldn't understand what she was dealing with. Not fully. She couldn't let her drag her into the madness of the forest, into the endless battle with the darkness that would never truly end. "I know you want to help," Olivia said quietly, "but this is something I have to do alone. The darkness is mine to control. If I don't, it will destroy everything. And I can't let that happen." Mia opened her mouth to protest, but Olivia raised a hand, silencing her. "Please, Mia, I can't ask you to risk your life for something like this. You have your own life to live." Mia's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "You're not asking me to risk my life. You're asking me to be your friend. And that's not something I'm going to walk away from. But if you really think you have to do this alone, then I won't stop you. Just promise me that if you need help, you'll ask." Olivia nodded, a knot forming in her throat. "I promise." Mia gave her a lingering hug, and for a moment, Olivia allowed herself to lean into it. She was so grateful for Mia's unwavering support, even if Olivia knew deep down that she had to walk this path alone. As the hug ended and Mia stepped back, Olivia turned her gaze toward the distant horizon, where the trees of the forest stood dark and silent in the twilight. There was still so much she didn't understand about the power she now carried. So much about the darkness that continued to lurk beneath the surface. And somewhere out there, buried deep in the earth, was the source of it all. She had to find it before it found her. The days blurred together as Olivia's thoughts returned again and again to the forest. The weight of her responsibility hung heavily around her neck, a constant reminder that the darkness was not gone, not truly. It was only dormant. She could feel its pull, its ever-present presence beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in her control. Despite her promise to Mia, she had become more distant, more consumed by the task before her. She couldn't explain the magnitude of what she was facing. She had to protect the town, protect everything she held dear. The forest had given her everything, but it demanded everything in return. At night, when sleep evaded her, Olivia would return to the clearing. There, she would place her hand on the stone, feeling its pulse thrum beneath her fingertips. And each time, the darkness would stir, its presence pressing in on her thoughts. It was so close, so near that she could taste it. But she had to stay strong. She had to fight. But that strength was beginning to waver. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and violet, Olivia stood at the edge of the forest once more. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The time had come to confront the heart of the darkness. "I'm ready," she whispered to the trees, though her voice quivered with uncertainty. She didn't know if she could truly control it, but she had no other choice. The darkness would rise again, and this time she would end it. The ground beneath her feet trembled as she crossed the threshold into the forest, the air thick with anticipation. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the land pressing down on her. The forest seemed to breathe with her, its pulse in sync with hers. But beneath that, something darker stirred. As she reached the clearing, the stone seemed to glow faintly in the fading light, as though it recognized her approach. Olivia stood before it, her breath catching in her chest. The stone was more than just a barrier, it was the seal. The last line of defense between the darkness and the world. The ground cracked again, and Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the darkness rising, pushing against the earth like a coiled spring. A low growl echoed from beneath her feet, reverberating through the clearing. It was here. She placed her hands on the stone once more, reaching into the earth. The power surged through her, ancient and wild. The force of it overwhelmed her senses, but she held on, letting it guide her. She could feel the darkness beneath her, its claws scraping against the earth's surface. It was trying to break free. It will never be free, she thought, her resolve hardening. Not while I stand here. With a guttural scream, Olivia pressed deeper into the stone, willing every ounce of the forest's energy to surge through her. The roots beneath her feet writhed, reaching down into the earth, seeking the source of the darkness. And then she felt it, the pulse beneath her, the heartbeat of the land itself. It was not the same as her own. It was twisted, corrupted, a dark reflection of the forest's true pulse. It was the source. The darkness was alive. Her breath caught in her throat. This is it. The air thickened with a malignant presence, and the ground trembled beneath her. The mist poured from the earth, swirling around her, suffocating, consuming. She could feel the weight of it, the oppression, the fear that it radiated. "You are nothing," the voice echoed from within the mist. "You cannot stop me. You were never meant to. I will break the forest, and with it you." The darkness rose before her, a twisted figure, a monstrous shape forged from shadow and fury. Its eyes burned with hatred, and its voice was a relentless roar in her mind. Olivia closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the roots beneath her trembling, but she couldn't let go. She was the forest. She had to be. I will not let you win. With every ounce of strength she had left, Olivia reached into the stone, her hands trembling. She forced the energy to surge through her, calling upon the very core of the forest. The ancient pulse, the heart, was hers to control. The darkness howled in fury as the roots tightened, the stone flaring with a blinding light. Olivia's body convulsed with the intensity of the power, her mind a chaotic whirl of pain and force. The darkness fought, but it was too late. The power of the forest was too strong, too ancient, to be broken so easily. For a moment, there was only light, bright, burning light that engulfed the clearing, drowning the darkness. Olivia screamed, her voice swallowed by the roar of energy as the forest pulse surged through her like a tidal wave. And then, just as quickly, the light faded. The mist was gone. The presence was gone. Olivia stood alone in the clearing, her body trembling, her breath ragged. The forest was still. The stone beneath her hand was warm, but the pulse had slowed. She had won. The darkness had been sealed away once more. But at what cost? It was over. At least, that's what Olivia tried to convince herself as she stood before the ancient stone, her heart still pounding in her chest. The forest was at peace, for now. The darkness had been sealed once again, buried deep beneath the earth where it could never reach the surface. But the price of victory weighed heavily on her. The power she had tapped into, the energy she had drawn from the earth, had taken its toll. Her body felt heavy, drained, and there was an emptiness inside her, as though the connection she once shared with the forest was beginning to fray. She had been its heart, its protector, but now she felt like a stranger in its embrace. The weight of the forest's power was too much for any one person to bear, and Olivia knew it. The forest had given her life, but it had also taken a part of her soul. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and orange. She could hear the birds in the distance, their songs faint but peaceful. The world was waking up, returning to normal, as if the battle had raged at the heart of the forest had never happened. But Olivia knew better. She had seen the darkness, felt its power, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it would rise again. She was the forest's heartbeat now, its protector, but she was also its prisoner. The cycle would continue, and she would be there, always fighting, always guarding. And though she had defeated the darkness, Olivia felt the weight of it within her, forever. With one last look at the forest, Olivia turned and walked away. The heart of the forest would continue to beat, but now it was up to her to make sure that it never faltered again.